Oh, already?
So you overlap.
Tom doesn't hear.
I'm not gonna start early. I'll wait for Dana.
Oh, okay.
No, you'll be waiting.
I'm gonna start at 6.
She and I were joking about that before. She's like, "You're obsessively compulsively early." I am.
Which they hear too.
Gotta have time to get in, right? Nobody's happy anymore.
I pinch myself. Yeah, I've got the Hudson River in my district. And then I got
Welcome, everyone. My name is Tom Congdon, and I'm the Executive Deputy of the New York State Department of Public Service and the Chair of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. I want to welcome everyone for tonight's meeting of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. I'd like to turn it over to Tom Kaczmarek, the Executive Director of the DOB, to do a roll call.
Thank you, Tom. As Tom said, my name is Tom Kaczmarek, and I serve as the Executive Director of the DOB. As I call your name, just please indicate your presence. Tom Congdon?
Present, and you can turn to the next slide, please.
There we go. Thank you. John Sipos?
Present.
Senator Harkam? Here. Kelly Chichuro?
Present.
Alex Damiani?
Here, virtually.
Jane Thompson? Linda Malave?
Here.
Jennifer Waka?
Present.
Elise Peterson? Present. Joe Leary? Here. Dave Lockbaum?
Here.
Mayor Knickerbocker?
Present?
Deputy Supervisor Crichton?
Here.
Susan Spear?
Here.
Legislator Ulay?
Here.
And Tom Carey? Are there any board members present that I missed? All right, hearing none. Before I turn it back over to Chair Congdon, I just want to provide a few brief reminders to our panelists and participants to promote a smooth meeting. First, to our in-person board members and guest presenters, please speak into the mic to ensure your comments are clearly heard and accurately recorded. To our panelists joining by Zoom, please keep your mics muted unless you are speaking. To our Zoom participants, please reserve the chat feature for reporting any technical issues. Only questions captured in the Q&A are able to be saved and reviewed for response later. And then finally, all speakers tonight are asked to indicate your name before making statements. This will support tonight's court reporter with accurately recording tonight's meeting. Let me just acknowledge Assemblymember Levenberg is with us as well. And with that, I turn it back to Chair Congdon.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. And next slide, thank you. So many of you know the history of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. For those who are just tuning in for the first time, and I just want to welcome Superintendent Trombley right over here. That's okay. Welcome. As an oversight board, we provide a venue for information exchange as it pertains to the decommissioning of Indian Point. We are an important body for interacting with the public and making sure that the public is aware of activities at the site. We are not a regulatory body. I want to make that clear. But some of our members have some regulatory jurisdiction. And we are very pleased to have the federal agency with primary jurisdiction over decommissioning join us this evening as a guest presenter at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A number of questions have been raised in a few meetings. We've been kind of saving up a number of questions for you, but you've always been responsive to our requests for information, our requests for presentations, and we greatly appreciate your partnership. We will also be hearing tonight from state agencies with some regulatory jurisdiction over decommissioning and what we've been doing. We will hear from Holtec on actual decommissioning activities since our last meeting and what is planned going forward. Then we will have a 30-minute public statement hearing, and then we will adjourn. So with that, let me go right into next slide and welcome our guest presenters from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'll ask you to each introduce yourselves and give a brief background as to the role you play at your important agency.
Great, thanks, Tom. My name is Paul Crone. I'm from Region 1. I'm the Director of the Division of Radiological Safety and Security. That's the division that has oversight of decommissioning of Indian Point. So I'll go down the table here.
Sure. My name is Anthony Dimitriadis. I'm the branch chief responsible for oversight of decommissioning, spent fuel storage, ISFSI, and also operating reactor health physics.
My name is, I want to make sure I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Richard Turtell. I'm a senior financial analyst and the acting branch chief
for the Financial Assessment Branch in Rockville, Maryland of NRC's headquarters. And my group and myself have oversight, and we're continually looking at the Decommissioning Trust Fund, sometime referred to the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust. And that's my background.
We have a number of subject matter experts in the audience. One who will be speaking shortly here from the slides is Catherine, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Warner. I'm the lead decommissioning inspector and a senior health physicist out of NRC Region 1.
So again, Tom, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to talk to the DOB tonight. I think you're going to find what we have to say very informative. We're going to concentrate on 3 main topics tonight. We have about 16 slides to go over. The risk profile for Indian Point is going to be the first topic. That's from construction to operation to shutdown to decommissioning activities. To give you an idea of the risk profile and how that's shaped out through the life cycle of the plant. The next subject we're going to talk about is decommissioning trust fund requirements. How does a plant put money away to ensure safe conditioning and returning to a greenfield type status? And the results of some of our recent inspections that relate to decommissioning funds. We'll talk about those in some detail. So in terms of questions, I think it would be most effective if we just go through the slides in a direct manner and give you the information and then open it up to questions. I think that'll be more efficient.
Sure,
For the flow of
that's fine.
information tonight. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. So before I turn it over to Tony, I just want to give you a broad sense or context for how we conduct what we call ISFSI inspections, Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. So we're talking about the dry casks out on the pad with a big security fence around it. That's an ISFSI type inspection. So we have an inspection manual chapter that's up there, the number's up there. That, of course, is publicly available. So if you want to know exactly what we look at and how often we do it and how many hours we devote to it, it's all in there. That's the same procedure we used as the plant loaded its casks through 2023. What you're going to hear over the presentation tonight is all the spent fuel is out of the spent fuel pools and now on the pads, on that ISFSI pad. There's no spent fuel left in the wet spent fuel pool. Let me give you some perspective too. The pictures I want to give you a short description of. Lower left is the Unit 3 spent fuel pool. You can see the surface of the body of water there. And that rigging mechanism to the left-hand side of the picture is what helped move the casks. The casks are very heavy. They're 80 to 100 tons, right? So it requires specialized rigging equipment. That's what some of those beams and trusses are on the left side of the picture. If you look at the right picture, that's a picture of a cask actually on the pad. People are standing next to it for scale, several feet high, on a concrete pad. That's 3 feet thick, reinforced concrete, built to withstand earthquakes, etc. And as I said, the cask is very heavy, 80 to 100 tons, depending on the particular vendor and design. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let me just talk a little bit about the cutaway in the picture here so you have some sense of what a cask looks like internally and what goes into it. So at the center, those are the spent fuel bundles. They're about 14 feet high. And you can make out in that picture that they're in a can that is sealed. It's evacuated, there's no moisture in it, there's an inert gas on it, and it has a welded top. So that's a sealed unit. And then you have a large amount of concrete on the outside of it, which helps provide shielding. So when we look at these casks, a company will design a cask, and we spend a lot of time reviewing it. And what's important is, what are we looking for when we review a cask? What do we expect it to do? And that's something called the safety function. So I'm going to give you an idea of what a safety function is, because I don't want you to just kind of hear the regulatory speak. I want to try to explain to you what we're evaluating for. So first is what we call confinement. No communication of the radioactivity in that inner steel can to the environment, right? It's got to be sealed, it's got to be tight, zero leakage. So that's a safety function, confinement. Prevent nuclear fission and criticality. Those fuel assemblies have to maintain a certain spatial distance. There's different neutron absorbers between them. We don't want it to go critical, right? So the spacing and the materials matter. So that's part of the design review. Radiation shielding, there's still radioactivity associated with the bundles even after they've been out of the pools. Another design consideration is the ability to retrieve the spent fuel if necessary. I'm talking decades down the road, when we have a national level type solution for permanent storage. You know, you would eventually have to unload these, right? So you have to design that into the concept. And then this varies a little bit from site to site, but all of these have to be able to withstand the local worst case external conditions, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, right? All of that are designed. So a vendor comes up with a design. We review that design in detail. We run computer codes on it. We look at combining loads. You know, when you have a house and you have code for like building your house, there are codes that exist for building something like this, right? So we verify the code requirements are met. Let's see. The other thing too is, you know, from a pure engineering standpoint, we put a lot of conservatisms in these. We assume the worst case loads, combinations of loads, concurrent events, and underestimate the material strength, right? Because we want these things to be built with a lot of margin. Okay, with that, hopefully I gave you a high-level overview. I'm going to turn it over to Tony so he can give you a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Paul. So this diagram shows an ISFC cask system. We call it a system for a reason, which is composed of what's called an inner steel canister, which you could see the silver cylinder there, surrounded by a thick overpack that is made of more than 2 feet of concrete, surrounded by heavy steel. This system is very robust, very tough, and it's also very heavy, as Paul indicated. So that's why we call it a system. It's never just one thing. It's the entire package. Let me just make clear, the inner canister is sealed, and it's welded closed before it is placed in the overpack. There are tests that the people do to ensure that it's sealed for a variety of reasons. It's totally dry. And it's sealed and it's welded shut with a very heavy lid. And then there's another lid on top of that, which you can see at the top of that. There are various ISFC systems, storage canisters that is, in use throughout the industry in the United States and in the world. Companies that design the canister storing the fuel include companies such as NAC International, Tianarano, and Holtec, among others. Indian Point uses the Holtec system. As you can see in this diagram, the cask is considered a system, and I'll show you a picture of the actual ISFC pad at Indian Point in the next slide. Our inspections involve planning and coordination, conference calls, review of procedures, many documents and records, interviews with site personnel, and of course, plant walkdowns. Our inspectors have unfettered access. The inspections are multidisciplinary and they're very intrusive. There are procedures and records that I mentioned that are reviewed before, during, and after the site visits. And the inspections can involve either one inspector or a team of inspectors. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the spent fuel stored on what's called the ISFC pad. The picture shows the ISFC pad at Indian Point that stores the spent fuel. You could see some of the security features from afar, and the building and the house is the security officers and equipment. Next slide, please. So I didn't want to give you slides with a lot of writing and the regulatory speak. I wanted to give you a visual of what an ISFC pad looks like. This is a picture of construction of an ISFC pad at another nuclear site that is very typical of all ISFC pads. As you can see, there's a lot of very heavy steel rebar that is used before any concrete is actually poured. There's a lot of engineering that goes into the design of the ISFC pad, in the construction of the ISFC pad. Next slide, please. So the NRC staff from Region 1 conducts ISFC inspections at Indian Point. In fact, the NRC staff began to inspect the ISFC program at Indian Point as far back as 2008, when the site was operated by Entergy and was loading fuel from Unit 1 and then later from Unit 2. At least 14 inspections were conducted since that time, and there are 14 inspection reports available in our electronic records database system called ADAMS, and they're available to the public. To give you a high-level description, as I mentioned before, the following examples are what our inspectors look at, and they include fuel assembly selection to be loaded into the canister. That's done inside the spent fuel pool that you saw on the second slide. Loading and unloading activities. That means use of cranes and heavy equipment like Paul mentioned, these things are very, very heavy. Drying and welding operations, so they dry out when it's taken out of the spent fuel pool, it's dried completely. And then once it's completely dry, and they weld it closed. And then they also, our inspectors look at occupational and public radiological exposure safety and movement onto the ISFC pad, which is done very, very slowly because they want to make sure that it's very safe. ISFC processing involves cranes and heavy equipment because these canisters are very heavy and they require careful movement and use of robotic equipment to actually seal them. So the welding isn't done necessarily by an individual. It's done by a robot, which saves people's eyes and various things. So there's a lot of safety involved with that. The design used at India Point is a welded canister based system that involves the inner steel canister that contains the fuel and is sealed closed. That container is surrounded by an additional steel cylinder that's about more than 2 feet or more concrete surrounded by steel that provides robust shielding and protection. And these systems are, like I said, very robust. Next slide, please. So this is another picture of the ISFC pad at India Point. And the number, this slide provides a specific information of the number of casks currently stored at India Point. You could see there are a total of 127 casks currently loaded at Indian Point, and the various units are listed there. How many casks from each unit are listed? The last slide, the last bullet lists that there's going to be an additional 10 to 15 casks to store what we call is GTCC, greater than Class C waste. What does that mean? Greater than Class C waste is a waste that exceeds the low-level waste disposal criteria permitted at sites such as Barnwell, the site in South Carolina, or Clive, Utah, or WCS in Andrews, Texas. So this is criteria that's classified in our Part 61 regulations, and that waste cannot go into a low-level waste disposal site. That has to be stored until a long-term solution is done by the federal government. Next slide, please. So moving from the ISFC inspection program, this is a slide that is designed to show you the risk profile of Indian Point. So as you can see, the EP requirements, there's been some questions about that. The EP requirements are not being eliminated. They were adjusted to reflect the risks associated with dry fuel storage. But let's start at the beginning. This slide shows the risk profile of Indian Point, and as you can see at the top of the orange curve, safety risk is at its highest when the plant is operating, and it's managed risk. As you can see, the safety risk is significantly reduced when the plant ceased operations, as you can see in the down slide. The safety risks were further reduced when the spent fuel was removed from the reactor vessel into the spent fuel pool. And then finally, the risks are even further reduced when the spent fuel was loaded into the casks and moved onto the ISFC pad. So there's a number of reduction of safety risks associated with that. And now I'll turn it over to Rich.
Good evening. Again, my name is Richard Turtill, and we'll just take a look here on the first slide, and joining me in just a moment will be Catherine Warner. Next slide, please. So I'll be discussing the reactor decommissioning trust funds that are required by NRC regulation at 10 CFR 5075. Basically, the objective, the purpose of these funds is a focus on radiologic decommissioning to ensure that the decommissioning of the licensed facility is completed and that all residual radioactive material is removed so that the site can ultimately be released the licensee can be released from its license. Our definition, the NRC's definition of decommission is to remove a facility from service and reduce the residual radioactivity to levels that permits this termination of the license and the release of the property for unrestricted use. The bottom line is there's a lot of dialogue often regarding what is decommissioning, and I know we tend to conflate. So NRC's mission, its vision, its focus is radiologic decommissioning. So at times we'll hear information and numbers, et cetera, that start to include a lot of other areas such as spent fuel management, site restoration, getting beyond getting to and beyond greenfield. So it's important to recognize that distinction. The funds are used, again, for radiologic decommissioning unless otherwise authorized by exemption. And we have a good handful of licensees that have requested such exemptions based on the balances of their decommissioning trust funds. Our measure is reasonable assurance. So we are seeking, from a financial perspective, reasonable assurance that funding will be available for decommissioning. Because we're talking very long time frames. Licensees have up to 60 years from cessation of operations to fully radiologically decommission their facility. So that is a time limit on any licensee, that 60-year window. The Indian Point sites are clearly pursuing not a 60-year window to complete decommissioning. Next slide, please. What we see at the NRC is a decommissioning funding assurance life cycle. And from the get-go, we ensure that before radioactive, any fuel that we've been discussing here, any fuel that is received at the site, before any initial criticality, funding is in place before such activity occurs. So we ensure the licensee has funding in place. Either there are a series of different types of instruments. Utilities often can rely on future contributions. At this time, all licensees, by and large, are fully funded for their decommissioning. So we ensure from the get-go, and Vogel Units 3 and 4 in Georgia just initiated operations over the last 2 years, and we work diligently to ensure we had commitments and funding in place for that. The next point is the licensee maintains funding throughout. So Indian Point will be reporting to us on an annual basis the status of their decommissioning trust funds. When in operations, a licensee will report to the NRC biannually or every 2 years, and they are stating the balances of their funds and using some formulaic approaches early in plant life. But as we get closer to decommissioning, and in decommissioning, it's all based on site-specific costs that the licensee provides in terms of what are the actual costs. They use one or more funding methods, as I just discussed, and I just want to reinforce, from initial fuel load to completed decommissioning, there is this ongoing reporting. By March 31st of every year, as required by NRC regulations, currently the 23 reactors in decommissioning are reporting to NRC, and we are evaluating those decommissioning trust fund reports. There's the status of their spending and the status of the balance of the DTF. And we will work very closely with the regions as they undergo their inspections on decommissioning progress. Next slide, please. We're currently reviewing the March submittals, and we're pretty much getting through them. So the NRC's review ensures licensee decommissioning funding is in place. So licensees are providing on the record the current balances of their DTF, their decommissioning trust funds. Again, as I indicated, every 2 years in operations, licensees will provide. Every single year, any licensee that is in decommissioning mode is reporting to NRC. Currently, there are 94 operating reactors. There are 23 reactors in decommissioning. We are currently reviewing Indian Point's most recent submittals. I've got information there if you're all familiar with our Adams numbers. I also want to emphasize the licensee's funding is overseen by a trustee. So the licensees themselves do not have investing authority. They are working with trustees, investment managers that are independent of the agents of the licensee. So I just want to emphasize that trustee relationship. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I have 2 slides I'm going to go over. I'm going to discuss the NRC's inspection program for the review of the Decommissioning Trust Fund and a violation associated with trust fund usage documented in a recent inspection report. The inspection procedure number is listed on the screen and is publicly available on the NRC's website. We review financial assurance on an annual basis with an option to review anything between inspections as necessary. Qualified decommissioning inspectors lead the effort with support from NRC financial analysts and the NRC project manager for the site. The purpose of these inspections is to supplement the NRC's financial assessment branch's review of the trust fund. The goal is a high-level review of activities performed at the site compared to trust fund spending and the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report schedule. As the frontline eyes and ears of the agency, we as inspectors know what is going on at the site on a real-time basis. We can review at a high level the level of spending versus the ongoing projects and activities at the site, since we maintain awareness of major activities and frequently visit the site. We also document progress of decommissioning, like activities taken and any changes to the schedule that could impact decommissioning, both for full agency understanding and for posterity. How do we perform these inspections? We focus on and review major activities to determine whether significant departures from schedules the licensee has submitted are expected or have occurred. We review any notifications made to the NRC of such changes to determine if notifications may have been required. Typically, there is a small document request. We spend a couple of hours reviewing these documents, including the annual submittal, and we have an interview with the licensee and their financial staff lasting about 2 hours. We take a high-level look at spending and the licensee's process for using these decommissioning trust funds. We have questions in our inspection procedure we ask during the interview, and anything that seems off, we probe deeper as necessary. Also, we continue our inspection if there are any follow-up items from the document review or the interview. Next slide, please. Moving on to the severity level 4 violation regarding inappropriate trust fund usage documented in an inspection report issued in February. I identified this during last year's inspection with support from Rich and our NRC headquarters staff. The violation was for Holtec's failure to establish proper oversight and controls to ensure that expenditures from the decommissioning trust fund at Indian Point were only used for legitimate decommissioning purposes. Specifically, Holtec used funds to support community outreach activities that were not related to removing the facility or site safely from service and reducing residual radioactivity to a level that permits release of the site and termination of the license. This involved about $63,000 combined from the trust funds of each of the 3 units. Note that a severity level 4 violation includes those of no or very low safety significance. In this case, no safety consequences were identified, and it should be noted that $63,000 was a small percentage of the trust fund and did not put completion of decommissioning at risk. That being said, this was a violation which needed to be corrected, extent of condition reviewed, meaning review any other community outreach expenditures at IPEC and other Holtec sites, and adequate corrective actions be put in place. Any licensee can contribute to community outreach type events, but the funds cannot be out of the trust fund because they do not relate to decommissioning at the site. The NRC reviewed extent of condition at other Holtec sites and issued violations at Pilgrim, Oyster Creek, and Palisades around the same time. Holtec responded to the notice of violation, describing the corrective actions already taken and planned corrective actions left to complete. And these included restoration of the funds, which has since occurred. We are currently conducting an inspection of financial assurance, including the annual March submittal and corrective actions completed to date for the violation. These results will be documented in the second quarter inspection report, which should be issued in the July-August timeframe. We will do a follow-up inspection of the longer-term corrective actions during a subsequent inspection. Thank you, and now I'll turn it back over to Paul to finish us out.
Thanks, Catherine. So let me just emphasize a couple of the key takeaways you've heard in the last 15 minutes or so. First, Tony covered this. We inspect and become very intrusive during all of the decommissioning activities. The fact that Catherine went down to the level of a spreadsheet and saw where some of the decommissioning funds were being spent is just an example of that. I mean, that's just a great inspection pickup. All of our findings and conclusions are objective and consistent with our enforcement policy. You heard the description of the severity level 4. That's the lowest in our traditional enforcement process of 4 levels. All of our inspection reports are publicly available. It's important, like Tony mentioned, right? All of the ISFC inspections we have going back to 2008, it's all retrievable. You can see the whole history of that whole program at the site. Our decommissioning inspections focus on risk-significant activities. Catherine, as a lead inspector, makes several journeys to the site throughout the year to look at specific activities. We also have security inspections associated with the ISFC pad. You saw the fence around it, right? There's a security installation and regulatory requirements that go with that. We inspect that. And, you know, Tony mentioned this, but I want to emphasize it, unfettered access. As inspectors for the federal government, we can go anywhere on that site, anytime we want, ask any question, and get a response. So that not every country has that posture for their inspectors. We do. So we are intentionally intrusive. And, you know, finally, I'd emphasize that the ISFC pad and the casts, they're robust and they're secured around the clock 24/7. We have a lot of backgrounders and information on our public website. I have some of those hard copies here tonight if you'd like to know how to get at them or, you know, just want a taste of them. So now, Tom, let me return it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for the presentations. I know a number of DOB members have questions. Senator Harcum.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you being here. We appreciate the work you do. I know last time things got a little feisty, but we really do appreciate the work you do and being here. I have two questions on 2 different subject areas. The first on finance. At our last meeting, we learned that the individual transactions are not available to the public. So aside from that 60,000 that you found, I think you mentioned you look at level of spending. Would the level of spending and the types of expenditures, are they what you would normally expect to find at this stage of a decommissioning process?
I'll add some context and then give it to Rich and Catherine.
Again, knowing that we can't ask you specifics.
The 63,000 Catherine mentioned were activities that were funded by the plant, the plant operated, okay? So whether it was a local parade or a softball team, right? And the plant continued that once they were in the decommissioning phase. But here's the difference. The requirements change when you're in the decommissioning phase. And Catherine mentioned this. Now you have to be much more careful about the pot of money you take those parade funding out of. It can't come out of, by our statutes, it can't come out of the decommissioning fund. That money is reserved for reducing the radiological footprint and decommissioning the site, right? So it was happening before, but when the plant transitioned to decommissioning, they didn't pick up the fact.
Well, I was really more interested in the other expenditures. Do the other expenditures that you looked at, aside from the 60,000, and thank you for catching that, are they at a level you would expect to see at this point in the decommissioning of a plant? And do they all look regular or no irregularities in those?
As I mentioned, we are doing an ongoing inspection at this time, so I can't comment on what we're reviewing at this time.
Okay.
Because it's still in process. That will be documented in a publicly available inspection report this summer. But going backwards to last year's inspection, we did identify that one violation, and then we're looking for that reasonable assurance as whether they have funds to complete decommissioning, and we did find that reasonable assurance, yes.
All right, thank you. And then if we can just switch to safety for a moment. There was a May 29th article in LOHUD and the Journal News in which the NRC is quoted about Holtec requiring essentially non-disclosure agreements about safety and potential safety violations from departing workers. Is that something that any of you can talk about?
Yeah, I'll tee up the regulation, and again, I'll hand it off to Catherine.
Thank you.
So the regulation we're talking about is called 10 CFR 50.7 Foxtrot. What does that mean? Look, the heart of that is any worker, any radiological worker has to be free to come to the NRC to report a safety concern. There can be no blockage, no inhibition to that. So, to your point, Senator, we looked at Holtec's agreement. We thought there was some restrictive language that to a normal reader, we thought that could inhibit somebody from coming to us to present the concern. So with that, let me turn it over to Catherine and where she went with that fact.
We identified this during normal inspection activities, and we did document a notice of violation during the first quarter inspection report that came out, I don't know, about a month ago now. So with the notice of violation, we cited them for having those type of agreements and enacting them. But we did not find at any time, we did not find any evidence that it actually restricted anyone, but there's definitely potential there by having that language in the agreements. So with a notice of violation, we're within 30 days, Holtec will respond to us with corrective actions, and we'll review those corrective actions and also, of course, take a look at extent of condition, just like we did for the trust fund violation.
You know, and Catherine mentions an important point. The violation is about the language in the agreements. It created the potential for such a situation to occur. We have no evidence that one actually did. So again, no evidence that one actually occurred, but the language could have created the potential. That's enough to make a severity level 4 violation.
And one last question. That was in relation to people who were leaving employment. Have you found any evidence of language like that for people coming into employment?
There were two examples listed in the violation. One is those separation agreements you mentioned, and the other was the conditions of employment. So that's a document that I understand almost every employee signs when they are working there, yes.
All right, thank you very much.
And could you please just repeat what the corrective action was for those violations?
The corrective actions will be reported to us within the 30 days. I can tell you that the site has written an issue report in IR, and they've taken corrective actions such as not using those documents anymore, but I'm going to leave it to Holtec to answer for their corrective actions to date.
Thank you.
Yeah, our violation letter time gives them 30 days to respond, and it was issued on May 21st. So on the docket, we expect a response before or on June 21st.
Okay.
Haven't seen it yet.
Assemblywoman Levenberg?
Thank you.
Oh, and before you go, I just want to also acknowledge a few additional board members have joined us, Richard Webster and County Legislator Colin Smith. Welcome. Oh, and Superintendent Trombley.
I was just hoping to get on the question docket. Thank you.
Okay. After Assemblywoman Levenberg, then I believe the County Legislator has a question, and then we'll go to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you for all your work in overseeing this very long process. I do have a couple questions, probably more than my colleague here. I'm just going to do a quick follow-up, though, to his. The contracts that you're speaking of that refer to both the conditions of employment and the separation agreements, when were those contracts dated? Like, are those contracts going back to the beginning of the decommissioning process?
I can answer that, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead. I remember reading the violation, but I don't have the contrary to memorized, so.
Yeah, I don't have the dates right in front of me. It is listed in our inspection report, the dates of the signed contracts that we cited, but it does go back to about when Holtec took over the site, I think.
Yeah, I think roughly, memory serves me, we could verify like July 2021, something like that.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, why would those have just been coming to light now? Is that just because you're the one scrutinizing now? Anthony, you're doing such a good job.
It's a fair question and an interesting one. We have many processes ongoing at this site and other sites at the same time. Mm-hmm. Through another process, we discovered a reason to look at it, and we did. And that led to the violation.
And you had also said that, well, you didn't think that there was anything that had resulted. You're just pointing out that it was part of the contract, but why is that something that you think you would actually know about if, if there are basically kind of hush orders for employees and former employees.
That's a fair question, yeah. How do you know
Like, how would
the
you know?
absence of information? How do you
Yes.
know? I think part of it for me would be historical trends. A certain population, you can look at it for years, right, over decades, right? I think the other thing is, with the eyes and ears, we're on the deck plates a lot. People don't hesitate to walk up to us when they see the NRC hat and provide us information. And if that was slipping, I think we would pick it up. There's some other avenues that we look at too. Every licensee has something called the Employees Concern Program, right? And that's an internal program, and people bring issues to that. We'll look at that to see if things are adequately dispositioned, if things are being handled at the lowest level. And then finally, what goes into the corrective action program? How are they dealing with the issues? We spend, the premise of a lot of our regulations are a sound corrective action program. So if they're getting weak in doing evaluations and correcting issues, we engage, we see it.
May I add in, Paul?
Yeah, please.
The answer is we don't know for sure that it did not discourage them. And that's one reason why they got the violation. Also, the nature of the violation is one reason why the NRC chose to cite it instead of it being a non-cited violation. By citing it, it does require that response on the docket. So we're taking this very seriously.
As well you should, and I appreciate that.
I just wanted to add in, one of the
State your name,
reasons-
please.
I'm sorry, Anthony Demetriadis, I'm the branch chief for decommissioning. One of the reasons we decided to make it a notice of violation, which is different than an NCV, is it requires the licensee to respond on the docket. This would make it very, very public, not just the violation, which is always public, but also the response from Holtec. Therefore, if there is anyone who may have been discouraged or whatever, they would come out and we would have evidence of that. Does that make sense?
Except for the last part, it makes sense. I don't understand why that something would come out as a result of their corrective action.
So our inspection reports are public, and so when we issue a notice of violation that requires a formal response on the docket,
I got
which is
that.
public, right? And that is in the hope that anyone who may have been subject to this would see this back and forth, and they would say, oh, this is this is what the response is. Am I part of this? Should I be concerned about this as a previous employee or current employee?
To that end, may I suggest, would NRC like to make a public service announcement to all the employees who may be watching from in the room and on our webcast, what their whistleblower protections are?
And let me just add in, as part of that, our regulations require the licensee to post the violation on site where the people work. And I think a lot of them are here and they're aware of that, but certainly you can.
How about requiring direct notification to people who signed
Right.
the NDAs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really unbelievable that, that any, licensee could actually have that kind of stipulation in their contracts. I think that we rely upon this type of whistleblower notification to make sure that we are protecting the safety of both workers and the public. So this is, not just, to me, the fact that it's, what is it, level 4? Level 4 violation, which is kind of, the same as that $63,000 amount of money that was directed to, public benefits out of the trust fund of billions of dollars, that those two are the same level of violation is kind of disheartening, I guess would be the nicest way to put it.
Just want to add? State
Yeah,
your
this
name.
is
Yep.
Bruce Watson from the NRC. I want everyone to understand, we have an overriding program called the allegations process, and anybody can make an allegation of wrongdoing either about the NRC or about a licensee. And this is done, can be done discreetly, and we do our best to protect the person making the, I'll say, complaint or allegation. And so we have a formal program for that. You can find it on our website, and anybody can call the 800 number or whatever it is and make a complaint about anything, and we'll do our best to make sure that their name and information is not disclosed to the licensee or to the NRC folks that are involved if it's against NRC employees.
Which is also, which is good to know and reassuring, but again, if you've been threatened, your job or your future or whatever your, your income or anything else, your retirement, then, you might think twice before making that report, because you
And that's
may
why
or
we
may
gave,
not trust the
and
government.
that's why they received a violation.
Correct, I understand.
Violation,
Will the
and I appreciate
employees-
the public service
Yes.
announcement as well.
Will-
Yeah. So,
Can I just ask, will the employees that signed those agreements receive notices that those provisions in the agreements are no longer valid?
We will be reviewing the licensee's corrective actions. And again, I would turn to Holtec to say what their corrective actions have
Yeah,
been so
we
far
could-
to date.
Holtec will
We'll-
be presenting in a bit.
I know. So do you accept that's a good idea?
We'll be reviewing the corrective actions to determine they're adequate.
Yeah.
No, but
That's fair.
Anyway, I
It's-
still-
it's-
I
but
still
you
have
have
a
the
couple more
review,
questions.
right? You don't have to
Richard,
accept what they
it's
say.
fair. They're going to review what Holtec files as the corrective action, and we'll go from there.
I wanted to know about the restoration of the $63,000 of funds. Where was that from? Did they have to go back out to did Holtec have to go back out to the, where they gave the funds to and get the money back? Or was that just out of their pockets?
actually, Rich and Catherine, do you want to take that?
Curious.
Well, I just want to clarify that licensees can contribute to whomever they wish out of their own
I
pocket.
understood that.
So, so your question is, from where did that funding come from? My understanding is they literally just refunded with interest, the DTF fund from their own coffers. their
Okay,
own-
thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
And then I just wanted to, again, follow up on the question about what is actually reported out to, from the decommissioning trust fund. And I heard, Catherine, that you had mentioned that you believe that it's still in good shape to follow through on the requirements for decommissioning over the course of the 60 years that's required. But how do we, as the public, know how that fund has grown in over time if we have no transparency within the fund?
So there have been questions, does the NRC or does the licensee, be it Holtec or any other licensee, provide a line item audit approach? That is not a requirement in licensees, so NRC is not expecting that, and licensees are not providing such. What we do work with and require is we look at current funding every year as of December 31st of the prior year. We look at the planned spending for that previous year, and then we look at actual spending for that previous year. We're looking at balances. Balances were significantly impacted in the 2022 timeframe due to the equities market and the fixed income market taking a hit. Licensees, in many cases, adjusted appropriately in that they extended out for a while their decommissioning plans. We will work with the regions to try and to ensure we understand what is the money being spent on, what is the magnitude of the money being spent, and what is the progress. So we will pull the string on that and seek more information. The bottom line, but the bottom line is we are looking at what the licensee says continues to be the forecast for site-specific estimates, and to ensure that their balances that they provide us are in fact in place that can meet those decommissioning requirements.
Great, and just to comment on your comment, which is that you said that licensees have had to extend the time frame of their decommissioning because of the equities market and the status of their fund. So, for example, we've heard that Holtec is going to extend the time frame for their decommissioning. So that may or may not have been related to anything else except for money.
Is that a question or statement?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, this is complicated.
Feel free to comment on it if you believe it's a question.
Well, I'm going to speak from any investment approach. It is an NRC authorizes a large window, a 60-year, I'm not going to characterize it, to decommission. A licensee, an entity has funding to decommission, and they provide to the NRC what their time frame is, what the time horizon is for the progress and completion. if there are impacts to their assets based on the market or other, they have that opportunity, just like any of the rest of us might say, in terms of retirement, because there are lots of good analogies with retirement. Hey, maybe now is not the best time. Let's extend this out. And that gives any entity that opportunity to take advantage of, or to even expedite. If the markets have been great, if they've got lessons learned and they become more efficient with their spending, they can take that opportunity and move in either direction. So.
And so was the 60 years originally, do you believe, established based on finances or based on other factors? And Paul, you can answer.
There were radiological conditions and considerations involved. If you leave a plant sit for 60 years, some of the radioactivity is going to go away. Hence your costs are reduced because it's not as hard to decommission. So it becomes a business choice on the part of any licensee. And there are some plants in this country in 60 years in a safe store configuration. It's kind of a mothball configuration.
I'd like to just quickly react to one of your observations, Assemblywoman, about the transparency of the funds. The funds are publicly available and the balances are publicly available. There was an annual report. We went over the balances at the last meeting. And signatories to the state's JP have regular meetings to go over expenditures as well. And we have a unique thing in New York State where we have the financial assurance where they have to maintain minimum balances. And so we've had some insights as a state throughout the course of the year to see that they're staying within those financial assurances and the commitment that they made to the state, separate from their commitments to the NRC. And last point on the financial markets, on the last report, they showed some significant gains as well. So just as a point of clarification.
But again, that's not public information.
That is public information.
That is the gains.
The gains were documented in their annual report. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, I can give you a hard copy tonight.
Am I correct in that?
I want to clarify.
Yeah, please.
So the gains based on investment success or not, so the gains based on the market returns are not presented in, I believe they are not stated in that annual report. What is stated in that annual report are what the current balance is and what the spending was during that year.
Correct. So you can infer.
So you can, and we can discuss that in more detail with amount of dollars, et cetera. So, and
maybe asked a different way, did the market appreciation in 2023 inure to the benefit of the decommissioning trust for Indian Point?
And that answer would be, from my analysis, is yes.
Tom, you mentioned protected activity discussion. I wonder if I could go back to that for a moment, just so we have clarity on what that means. So let me first say, Brett Kluken, are you on the line?
Hey, Paul, I am. This is Brett Kluken, the Regional Counsel for Region 1. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Brett, before you provide some perspectives on protected activities, the NRC as an agency would treat it very seriously if a manager or a licensee were found to be discriminating against an individual for having brought an issue forward to us. That is a big, big deal to us. It rarely happens. We take significant action when it does happen. But in terms of describing protected activity, Brett Kluken is our regional counsel in Region 1, so he's well suited to provide a description. So Brett, to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And I've asked Tom to post to the public chat, and I saw it just went out. The new reg or the brochure 0240, which is reporting safety concerns to the NRC. There's a link there to where it can be found within Public Atoms or our document keeping system or document registry. Essentially, that document goes through an overview of the allegation process, how you can report as a member of the public or as a plant employee concerns to the NRC. Plant employees are always free to bring concerns to the NRC in terms of anything you find that might be related to safety. And of course, members of the public as well as plant employees or contractors are always free to go to the Office of Inspector General at the NRC. to whether you have concerns about plant or licensee conduct, or you have concerns with respect to NRC conduct. You can always take your concerns to the Office of Inspector General. 50.7, which is duplicated in various parts of the NRC's regulations, talks about, or in terms of the substance of that regulation, talks about essentially protecting employees from discrimination for engaging in protected activities. And discrimination can be, some kind of adverse impact that tangibly impacts the conditions or terms and conditions of their employment. So it could be, anything from being fired to a reduction in pay, putting an employee in a less desirable position. But what's a protected activity? A protected activity can be requesting the commission to institute an enforcement action. It can be testifying at a commission proceeding, but most fundamentally, it is bringing a safety concern to the NRC. So if an employee brings a safety concern to the NRC, 50.7 says that a licensee cannot take adverse action against that employee, at least in part, for bringing that safety concern to the NRC, whether it be through our allegation process or through another mechanism. So if anyone has any additional questions on that, I'd be happy to answer it. I've already spoken more than I was planning to this evening. But again, we want to be very clear that we, as we put into the website, we welcome all concerns from members of the public, from plant employees. You are always free to bring safety concerns to us about any issues you have with respect to licensee conduct.
That was the public service announcement I was looking for. And to put a finer point on it, regardless of whatever language might exist in your contract, those protections apply, correct?
Absolutely. A licensee, that is the whole purpose of 50.7, which is a violation that was documented against Holtec, is that we, regardless of what, might be put into a non-disclosure agreement, put forward by a licensee employees are always free to bring us concerns.
And I just want to add that, to the, very grateful that that is in the NRC's playbook. Not sure that every employee that has been separated from would necessarily have read whatever number 0.7 or whatever, that they would actually be familiar. So grateful for the public service announcement tonight, but I think it would also be helpful in that corrective action if they were to inform both employees who've signed a contract with that provision as well as those who have been separated directly, to make sure that they are all informed of what their rights are under NRC regulations.
Okay, thank you all very much. County Legislator Ulay, you had some questions?
Thank you. Is this working?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. First, I'd like to second that suggestion that you both made around sending direct notice to the employees about their rights. Just because they have this right, if they don't know that they have this right, it doesn't mean anything to them. Secondly, you may be aware that our champions in Albany, State Senator Pete Harcum and Assemblymember Dana Levenberg, passed a law to stop Holtec from discharging radioactive water into the Hudson River. In response, Holtec sued the state. At the last meeting, we asked Holtec how they were funding that lawsuit, whether they were using any DTF funds for the legal expenses, and they couldn't answer the question and were quite dismissive. When will you be able to check on whether they are using DTF funds for that lawsuit? Are you going to have to wait until next year's report, or can you check more quickly?
I think there are two parts to that question. Let me take the bigger picture of the NRC's role and what you just talked about, and then Catherine, you were talking about the ongoing inspection this year. That'll be the second part. The lawsuit you mentioned is between Holtec and New York. The NRC is not a party to that. We have nothing in front of us to review. We don't have a comment on it. Maybe in the future we'll have something in front of us and we'll get involved. But at this point, we're not, to be frank. But I do understand the question, and it's a well-founded question. Let me turn it over to Catherine about, would that come up at our normal inspection procedure, that level of detail?
During our inspection, we do take a sample of the kind of expenditures that they're looking at. So again, the results will be in a publicly available inspection report this summer. But we do take a look at things like lobbying expenses that was documented in that February inspection report. So I can't tell you right now because it's still ongoing.
You're looking for it, though, is that fair? You're going to look for that at our request, that whether or not they are using DTF monies for the litigation?
It's certainly something that has come up.
And you
Yeah,
can confirm that it would be an improper use of funds.
We would be reviewing whether or not it's a reasonable use of the trust fund.
It's really a case by case, because remember where Rich started out? Is it related to the radiological goal of decommissioning the site, getting it back to Greenfield? Okay, tell me the specifics, and then I'll be able to make a rational decision about it. But I don't think we have those specifics at this point, in the sense that the inspection is still ongoing.
We would, to clarify, there are certain activities that would be clear-cut. They directly contribute to radiologic decommissioning, removal, et cetera. There are others that we have concluded are not. And you, the licensee, can fund them in any manner that you wish, but not out of the DTF. There are going to be gray areas. And as that comes to our attention, we will take a look. We'll consider, does this meet our definition? Does this contribute in such a way? Can we determine that that was a legitimate use of DTF dollars to move that, to make progress in the decommissioning of the site? We would work with our attorneys. And again, there are gray areas. We found very definitively that your contributions to a local, and granted, this is a very small dollar amount, your local community was not in any way a direct, it was very far removed from radiologic from decommissioning activities. As other issues may arise, or as we become more aware of them, and we are asked to look into the nature of such an expense, we would have to do an evaluation and make a determination. But again, not everything is always black and white, but clear cut in terms of distinction.
You know, Rich makes an important point about the depth of the expertise across the agency, in the sense that Catherine's an inspector on the deck plate, right? But she's certainly not a financial analyst. So she calls Rich and says, help me make sense of this. And then Rich has a question about, is this reasonable or not? That's a legal question. That's Office of General Counsel. That's our lawyers in Washington. So a lot of people take a look at this to get at the right answer for the agency, at the agency level. And we need to be consistent across the country, right?
Right, have you either authorized or analyzed litigation expenses before as to whether they're part of the DTF?
So we could talk about the Indian Point DOE settlement conclusion, if you will.
It's in the inspection report.
So in the publicly available inspection report, there were 3 items that, through Region 1 inspection activities, identified, pulled the string, if you will, looked at invoices and said, I don't know that these are adequate, legitimate decommissioning expenses. And we engaged, and Catherine can tell you more explicitly our process for that engagement, to evaluate. Holtec themselves provided a rationale as to why they thought these were legitimate decommissioning expenses as defined by NRC's what we would consider such. We evaluated their evaluation or their assertion and concluded otherwise in one area and concluded in the other areas that that is a more direct application of funds to move the site along in terms of decommissioning.
So what were the 2 other areas?
So one was DOE settlement fees. So in the case of, they are having their attorneys or whatever kind of settlement work that they would do to help move along the ultimate settlement of DOE-related high-level spent fuel fees. And the second, so of course, the third one we found not to be acceptable, which was the contributions to local donations. The second one, I know you're going to, thank you.
Yep.
So and I don't like the word lobbying. I live close to Washington. So a third position that we found was a lobbying organization that was used by Holtec to engage, inform, educate, whatever a lobbyist will do in Albany to inform assembly folk, representatives in Albany about items, things at the Indian Point site. So they in Albany would have a better concept, a better idea, and a more clear understanding of what's really transpiring at Indian Point, what is necessary. So our conclusion was that moved forward their effort to be able to go up and inform individuals and let them know what's going on at Indian Point? What is tritium, et cetera, et cetera. So we,
Is Holtec the, oh, forgive me.
so we concluded that we agreed that appeared to be a legitimate use to be able to move the site, to make progress in moving radiologic contamination off the site to our objective of terminating the license.
Are they the only ones who get to make a counter argument? Do we get to have a say? And I can tell by the way you're phrasing things that you're going in a direction that this is going to be quite a gray area in determining whether the use of the funds for the litigation is a proper use. Do we have a say in that? Do the hundreds of thousands of people who signed a petition have a say in that?
Anthony Demetriadis, I'm the branch chief for decommissioning. So the answer is partially you already have had that. When we do rulemaking that went to the public, we received numerous comments for the decommissioning trust fund use. And so we do the rulemaking, it takes years to do that. So part of that is yes. Secondly, this is why we have these, show up to these meetings so that we can take input, information from you. And so as you could tell, what you asked us is an area that sounds like it's gray. It's relatively new to me, to be honest with you, but we're going to be looking at that, and we'll have to engage people, like Paul said, our inspection staff, our experts in financial assessment, and also our legal counsels in headquarters. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I can already see what Holtec will say, of course, right? The loss, it will help them decommission quicker if they can just release the water in the Hudson. So yes, suing to overturn the law is a proper use of funds, is what they will say, I'm guessing. We all disagree, though.
Let me just make it clear. Holtec doesn't make the decision. We make the decision. Okay.
And two other very quick points. In terms of, there's such a thing as petition for rulemaking. If an individual member of the public organization feels that our rules and regulations are not appropriate, you can petition for a new regulation. I can show you the regulations and how to do that. But there's a process, albeit, as Tony said, it can be lengthy. But
20 years.
as we talked about the specifics, and Rich provided a lot of good detail, our inspection report on decommissioning trust funds from February 22nd of this year, page 11. So we had about six expenses in front of us. Basically, we got to call the balls and strikes, right? That's what we do. We said 2 were acceptable. Rich was right on. One was on Department of Energy spent fuel settlement efforts and keeping New York State legislatures informed and educated about decommissioning issues. We looked at the specifics of those 2 subject areas and said, okay, DTF, that works. But the things we talked about before, the parades, the softball teams, not a connection, right, to radiological controls. But that's spelled out. If you go to page 11 of that report, it's got a page of detail.
Rich, could I ask a clarification question? It's John Sipos over here. The DOE settlement expense line that you've been discussing, is that in connection with the federal government's breach of the standard contract to accept spent nuclear fuel at Indian Point?
Catherine Warner, yes.
Thank you.
On the lobbying, is it cabined in any way? I mean, would direct lobbying on a bill be part of an educational effort, for example?
Go ahead.
It depends. That's too much of a general, right? It depends.
Well,
It's
I
going
can make
to-
you more and more. Did Holtec lobby against the Levenberg-Harkenberg bill, and did you approve those expenses?
I'm not familiar with.
We're not familiar with, Tony Demetriadis again, I'm not familiar with the specific law that you're talking about, but we don't approve spending. We look at, like Paul said, we call balls and strikes. If Holtec authorized use of the decommissioning trust fund and we see that that was done, then we would issue a violation. If that were the case, they would have to restore the money plus interest.
Right, Mr. Demetriadis, I may say, first you told me my question was too general, then you told me my question was too specific. I don't think you can ask me for both.
No,
You
but
asked 2 different questions, and I think that was true for both.
A general one and a specific one.
It was true for both.
Richard, the point is, regarding that legal question you're asking, that's not in front of the NRC right now. And we're not going to express opinions.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to ask you. Was it in front of the NRC?
In terms
In other
of the
words,
lawsuit between
during
Holtec?
this, when you were looking at the lobbying expenditures that Holtec had taken out of the DTF, did it include lobbying against the Levenberg-Hartenberg bill?
Fair question, Richard, but we haven't finished the inspection yet this year,
No, but
right?
you already issued the violation report or the non.
Yeah, but that was for something in the past. Now we're trying to
No, I'm
look
asking,
forward.
this was in the past, I'm asking in the past.
What period is currently under inspection? Maybe just clarify, what period of time is currently under inspection?
We're looking at it, I mean, I can look at whatever I want, let's be very clear about that. But I'm mainly looking at expenses over like the last year since my last inspection was like June 2023.
Thank you.
Those
County
lobbying
Legislator,
efforts.
did you have any further questions? We have Superintendent Trombley, then Richard Webster, then Dave Lockbaum on the phone has his hand up, and then Deputy Supervisor Crichton, and then Susan.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a few quick questions, approximately 4. How was the trust fund initially funded? What entity? Was it Holtec? Was it public funds?
No, it was the initial licensee was.
I could speak to that
What-
if you would like.
I mean, it was
So
a utility, so.
during the period of vertical integration regulation back in the 80s and 90s, the Public Service Commission of New York authorized the collection of funds from ratepayers for facilities, for utilities that owned and operated power reactors, to put those aside. And this is at the time that the NRC started its decommissioning regulation, so this is mid to late 80s. And so the initial seed money for the decommissioning trusts is from New York State ratepayers, starting probably in circa 1990.
And the reason why the PSC would approve that is those were expenditures required by all licensees. And as a regulatory requirement, that is something that would be a prudent expense of a regulated utility, and why those costs would be allowed to be recovered in rates.
So would those be considered taxpayer dollars, or since they're ratepayers, is that
No.
a different designation?
If it wasn't a vertically integrated utility subject to rate-making powers of the Public Service Commission, then the licensee would have had an obligation to use proceeds from the sale of their power to meet the NRC's regulatory requirement. It's a business expense and a requirement under the reg by the owner and licensee of the plant.
So it's ratepayer, New York ratepayer dollars.
Thank you.
And if it were a private, independent power producer, Jen, it would be through the sale of their energy and also effectively come from ratepayers, but through the sale of the power. So I just want to make the distinction. The money was not public dollars. It was not owned by ratepayers. Ratepayers paid because they were paying for the cost of the electricity generated at the plant, which included a regulatory requirement to the NRC to fund the decommissioning trust funds.
Nevertheless, ratepayer dollars could theoretically be used to sue New York State if so approved. And
As
to
I said,
lobby New York State.
I'm drawing the distinction because the money left the ratepayer's pocket, but those do not then continue to be, those dollars are not owned and controlled by the ratepayers. The ratepayers paid for the electricity from the nuclear power plant. That cost of electricity from the nuclear power plant included regulatory requirements by the NRC that had to be met, and those rates were collected from ratepayers. So these are not public dollars. And so when the plant was sold from investor-owned utilities to independent power producers, the property of the decommissioning trust fund became the property of the new owner. But they have very strict limits by the NRC on how they can spend that money. Did I say anything wrong, financial experts at the NRC?
No, you characterize that very well. And in fact, some utility licensees that may need additional funding to meet our requirements show us what relationship they have with the Public Utility Commission when the PUC is next meeting to discuss its rate case, and what they are requesting in terms of proposal for fees that would then supplement that which we would require for future contributions in the next 2 to 4 to 6 years. So we see that the fund as total, that which is there versus that which will be contributed to with a 2% real rate of return, that we see and we confirm there's reasonable assurance, there's adequate funding, what we call DFA. They have DFA in place, decommissioning funding assurance. And the vast majority, so there's about $78 to $80 billion in funds amongst your 94 power operating reactors and your 23 decommissioning. The vast, vast majority was initiated back in the 80s, 90s, et cetera, and collected through these rate setting authority. And now future facilities that may be considered merchant, if they don't have such a relationship, they will need to come up with funding and put that in place right from the get-go. And we cannot rely on future contributions because they're not they're not a local government entity or a state government entity. So we require real funding in place.
Is that distinction that it's not taxpayer dollars that funded the fund, why information such as interest earned is not publicly disclosed?
I would speak generally to the fact that this is a business entities,
Okay.
a private entities, their assets. So, you know, if you're publicly owned and you see kind of an annual report from a public, you may see that, I don't know the fine detail in an annual report, but another entity such as Holt would not have that requirement or.
So with that being the case, since they are allowed to use financial vehicles to earn that interest, would those interest-bearing accounts come under some regulatory oversight, not the NRC, but perhaps the SEC?
And they may, so these trustees, and the vast majority are Northern Trust and Bank of Mellon, New York. They have that authority, and they have separate groups within some of those trustees. Some of them actually have investment arms. But the trustees themselves, by and large, are, and I can't speak to all of them, either the Office of the Comptroller or or they're submitting, or I'm trying to recall if it's a state regulatory agency, but certainly the Office of the Comptroller, the FRB, the Federal Reserve Board. So there is some oversight there. I can't indicate how comprehensive that is for all of the facility, all the decommissioning trust funds that are out there. But there is oversight by some federal entities. And the depth and breadth of that, I can't fully.
And then just one final question. Does the NRC have a branch inspector general from the federal government that oversees its activities?
So we to be clear about NRC, so we have, as probably all of you know, we have no one above us in terms of an entity. There's no Department of Energy.
No inspector general?
I'm getting there. So the
very
NRC is its own independent entity. We have within our agency an inspector general that has expressed very much interest in these decommissioning trust funds. So staff is being very responsive to the inspector general. They've even gotten into some of the issues regarding our prohibitions and limits on certain types of investments. And staff has been responsive to the IG on that matter. So they have a very high interest, it appears, in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Richard Webster?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and thank you, guys, for your efforts. I mean, sometimes I feel like the NRC could go a bit further, but that doesn't mean to say that you're not doing great jobs. So we just say that right up front. Thanks for coming. So I have a quick question. I think, Catherine, you said, well, don't worry, the trustees are backing up the licensees' decisions on what's legit and what's not legit. Is that right?
Did you say the trustees?
The trustees.
No.
So the trustees do not vet the expenditures?
Well, the trustees ultimately are the gatekeepers, if you will, sort of like an IRA, if you will. So there are those who invest IRA assets, but ultimately there is an entity that is the authority of that IRA. You don't own it at your own bank per se.
No, right.
So it's the same concept. So there's oversight by Bank of Mellon of New York's, the Northern Trusts, et cetera. And they have very detailed trustee relationships with the licensee.
Right.
And am I not answering?
Oh, no, you're good. I just want to say, it is the licensee's responsibility to conform to our regulations.
Understood. But what I'm saying is, let's say Holtec went to the trustee and said, I want to buy an island in the Caribbean. Would the trustee say, you can't do that?
you want to speak?
And part of this might be, and Rich maybe can help me, is there a fiduciary responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
That's part of the relationship, I believe, right? They can't spend it on willy-nilly like,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Do they, I just, that's the question I'm asking.
Well, they are submitting DTF-related, decommissioning-related expenses, that kind of information to the trustee and saying, these are the funds that we want basically released from the trust.
Does the trustee check whether they are legitimately within the scope of decommissioning?
I would say, as Paul is saying, there's a fiduciary responsibility, just as there is with these trustees that manage pension funds, et cetera.
Right.
Down into the detail, how that is actually done, I can't tell you, but I know these trustees have a true fiduciary duty to ensure funds are released appropriately.
Tony Dimitriadis, when we promulgated the regulations in 1988, the requirement was for licensees, all nuclear licensees would put aside monies in a decommissioning trust fund. When we say the word trust, it's very similar to like a wealthy family who devises a trust so that monies could be utilized, for example, for college education, not to buy a new car. Right. Similarly, the trust that the fiduciary has is outlined in a document. It's very detailed, and it would say it would have to be for legitimate decommissioning trust estimate or decommissioning trust funds. So, in your hypothetical, we want to buy a Caribbean island. If they actually said that, the fiduciary or whoever is the gatekeeper is incumbent upon them to recognize the trust and control that and say, yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. So that's good, but then I note that it seems like four Holtec trustees, or maybe it was all the same trustee, I don't know, but on four different reactors, the trustee made a mistake, right? And authorized these charitable expenditures. Well, no, the licensee made a mistake by asking for it, but the trustee made a mistake by authorizing it, right?
Is the trustee really watching every expenditure in
detail?
real time? Or are they really more focused on the investment portfolio?
Well, they're doing, go ahead.
Well, I have a theory on this. I don't know exactly what happened in these things. I suspect that it's the level of detail in these specific ones that happened where I'm guessing is too low for them to notice that what is exactly $63,000 were utilized for, but it's only speculation for me. But if it was, hey, we want to buy a Caribbean island, like you said before, and it's going to cost $500 million, I think that would bring off alarm bells, I suspect.
That would be well beyond the scope of the language in the trust.
Right, okay. So I just want to be more clear about the role of the trustee, because I think it's a little opaque. So the second question I have, I noticed that when I was looking at last year's expenditures, the spent fuel management expenditures were much higher than anticipated initially. Did you see the same thing?
In the March 2024 submittal for the calendar year 2023?
Yeah.
Again, we're currently reviewing that.
No, but the figures are there, right?
Yes,
And you've read them?
I have read them.
Okay.
As part of the inspection.
So the figures, the actuals are much higher than the initial anticipated, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So it seems to me that the conceptual problem here is that we have one Holtec entity being serviced by another Holtec entity, right? Holtec HDI is probably hiring Holtec International, or Holtec Indian Point LLC is hiring HDI. I'm not quite sure exactly how the relationships work, but there's an opportunity. Holtec's basically selling to itself. It used to sell spent fuel services to Entergy, right? So that was an arm's length transaction, but now it's selling spent fuel services to itself. So how do you know that they're not engaged in transfer pricing by inflating the price of those services?
And that's what we're currently looking at in these annual reports, in the providing by the licensee in the prior year what was anticipated to be spent and what was actually spent. And we're currently evaluating it as something that is not lost on NRC staff. So
Okay, but can you just tell me how you evaluate it? Or can you give me an example before of how you figured this? Because it looks like it's hard to figure out what is the market price of spent fuel management services, right? Because there's not a pretty narrow market for that.
You know, I think, Richard, great question. I think it goes into what Catherine said before in her presentation about pulling the string. So if you see that unexpected spent fuel management cost, What was the cask loading campaign going on at the time? Was it more than they expected? Was there some other driver? How many labor hours were spent on it? You know, how many casks did they load? Did they run into other problems or delays? It may be justifiable, but we won't know until we dig into it. And if it's not, then you're in a situation where we engage with our enforcement process.
So we would be pulling the string, as I like to say, gathering information. If we need to, obviously inquiring of the licensee in light of the progress that they're making, and we'll see where this takes us.
And specifically how we do that in the inspection process, we ask for documents, we interview the licensee, and then if we have any follow-up questions, we'll specifically lay out what we're looking for and have another follow-up conversation and document review. So we don't stop until we understand what's going on.
And like me say, I'm glad you're looking into that, because that's something that struck me as important to check.
Right, and that's one part of what we would do, but of course, an equally important part is to ensure that there is adequate funding for future anticipated expenditures as presented by the licensee. So we're doing multiple.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dave Lockbaum, I think you may have taken your hand down, but want to check. Do you want to pose a question?
It's more of a comment. This is Dave Lockbaum. The NRC posts allegation statistics to its website, and I called up the most recent report during the discussion of shyness of workers or inhibitions of workers to raise issues. In 2023, the NRC received 9 allegations from workers at Indian Point. In 2024, so far through May of this year, the NRC has received 6 allegations from workers at Indian Point. For context, the NRC received only 2 allegations from all other decommissioning sites combined. And I posted a link to that report in the chat.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Mr. Lockbaum, I didn't have the information at the tip of my tongue. But, you know, we post those statistics nationally at the end of every year for the previous year. But again, our interest is making sure people can come to us and don't feel inhibited to do so. So those are simply big picture statistics, but we don't often talk about numbers because we don't want anybody to be inhibited in any way.
Right.
They see a NRC hat in the field, they come talk to the person.
Yeah, that's great. Deputy Supervisor Crichton?
Thank you, Tom. I just have one. We spent a lot of time talking about money. I'd just like to go back to safety a little bit. April 5th, we had one of the things that people said we don't really want to expect in this area, in this part of the world. We had a 4.7 magnitude earthquake. Could you tell me what specifically the NRC did to assure that the plant was safe and the casks were safe? And I know that that Holtec is going to, I'm sure, report on that as well, but it was concerning, and it was great to hear that everything was okay. I just want to know, so we know what was done to ensure that everything was okay.
That's a fantastic question. Tony, I'll turn it over to you in a moment. Within 15 minutes of that earthquake, I had picked up the phone and called Tony, and Tony had already been on the phone to the plant. But I'll let Tony describe the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, it was a Friday. I received a call, like you said, from Paul, and I reached out to a number of licensees, one of which is Oyster Creek, and the other one here at Site VP Frank Spagnola at Indian Point. Checked on everything, and it had 0 impact on the site. They were doing, from what I recall from the call, they were doing walkdowns to make sure everything was safe, and there were no impact at all from the site. If you have any questions regarding in general about seismic events, we have experts here to answer your question.
Right, and that is Holtec who did the walkdowns. Did NRC go on site here or at Pilgrim to do their own walkdowns or to ensure that their critical areas had no impacts?
We did not. So Pilgrim would be too far. I think the earthquake was in New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, the Oyster Bay, sorry.
Oh, Oyster Creek, yes, yes. So just to put into context, if you have an earthquake, they used to use the Richter system, the measure. That's no longer used, from what I understand. It has to do with where it happens. So if there's a major earthquake in Kansas City, that may not really affect Indian Point very much at all, because it has to do with how far it is from the site. So we did not do that, but we have a relationship with Indian Point such that if we believe that there is a safety issue associated with whatever event's happening, I would launch inspectors to the site if I deemed that would be an issue.
Numerically, right.
Oh, yeah, yeah. What Bruce is saying, that the seismic event happened is well within the design envelope for what the site was actually licensed for from the beginning.
Right, understood. I think that was something we were always told. We just hoped it never happened, and, glad to hear everything looked okay.
Jim, one other point of reference you may find helpful. Remember, I think it was 2011, Mineral, Virginia, there was an earthquake that went on for some time. North Anna is another nuclear site that we regulate and had residents on. That was a higher level earthquake. I forget the Richter scale, but I think it was on the order of 5 to 6. Lasted for a couple of minutes. Point of reference on the ISFSI casts, they did not tip over. They moved a couple of inches on the pad. No cracks in the pad. Remember you saw that picture with the thick rebar and the concrete? Again, it's the robustness of the system point that Tony is making.
How do you know nothing happened inside of those casks?
It's part of the analysis that Daryl could speak to. Remember I said the licensee does all these models and designs, and we go ahead and check it. And that could be by computer models, in testing of materials.
And walk tests.
Daryl Dunn, NRC, Division of Fuel Management. So the casket, well, first of all, before a licensee picks a cask, they have to evaluate, how that cask is designed and constructed, and they have to evaluate their site parameters to make sure that that cask, that storage system, meets the requirements that they need for that particular site. So seismic design is part of that. And Holtec seismic design is included in their final safety analysis report. And this earthquake, the amount of ground shaking you had here at this location with that earthquake is about 1/10 of what the seismic design is for that particular storage system. So well within the design envelope.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit more context to the seismic issue. So there was a safe shutdown earthquake parameter that was established for Indian Point when it was designed. And as that term indicates, safe shutdown is the safe shutdown of the reactor. However, following the Fukushima incident, NRC did recommend that the spent fuel pools, which are outside containment, be reviewed, and in particular for Indian Point. And so, however, that analysis of the spent fuel pools at Indian Point was not completed because Entergy indicated that it would be shutting down the facility in early 2017. And so again, I'd just like to recognize the Holtec employees who are in the room who, on an expedited basis, moved the densely packed spent nuclear fuel from the densely packed spent fuel pools to the dry cask. So the issue about having a spent fuel pool that was not necessarily examined for a seismic hazard really became moot by the transfer of the spent fuel to the dry cask storage. And I think I just want to reiterate that is one of the benefits from the closure. And I think the April earthquake that you referred to is a reminder of that. So just appreciate putting that in context. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Spear?
Thank you. I first want to thank Catherine Warner for your diligence in doing these reviews and inspections. It's clearly made a difference, and we appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to emphasize that, I don't think we can expect former and even current employees to be reviewing public documents in atoms. So I would like to urge you to require a direct notification to anyone who signed that NDA that it's that language is not valid, and that they should understand that. So I would encourage you to do that. I'm not expecting an answer, but I just want to say that. The casks for greater than Class C waste, is that a different design, I assume, than the spent fuel rod casks?
Short answer is yes, but I'll let Daryl take it. And greater than Class C, we're talking about reactor coolant system piping, things you cut up into segments that still have activity associated with it because they got activated through the years of operation. It's just not spent fuel.
I understand, thank you.
Yeah, Daryl Dunn, NRC, Division of Fuel Management. The casts themselves are actually very similar. If you walked out onto the pad, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart probably. So it still has the very large, thick concrete and steel overpack, and it still has inside of it a welded stainless steel canister. The difference is what's inside and what design features need to be inside that cask. It's not spent fuel. It's not fissionable material. It can't go critical, but it does have a lot of gamma radiation. So you have to have shielding, and it's heavy material. It's internal parts of the reactor. So you have to make sure that they're secure inside the cask so they can be moved safely without them moving around and shifting the load. So there's still design requirements for it. It's just not, material that can be fissionable. You don't have to worry about criticality. You do have to be concerned about shielding. You don't really have to be concerned about thermal because there's really no heat load. But other than that, the casts themselves are very similar design, similar construction, and similar appearance.
Thank you. Last question. Can you talk a little bit about the frequency of the inspections of the casts on the ISFC and whether you inspect all of them or you do like a representative sample? And how you would determine that sample?
Yeah, it's 25. The inspection manual chapter I had on the slides is a reference, but I'll let the branch chief and the inspector talk to frequency.
I'll cover part of that. Catherine's actually quadruple qualified, so she could do that. So our inspections are twofold. One is there is a triennial security inspection that's done, and also a triennial safety inspection for the ISFC casks. My staff does the ISFC inspections, and like I said, when they were being loaded in 2023, it took about a year, over 4 quarters. We had our staff there during the loading operations, not every day, but we were there every quarter, probably 2 or 3 times a quarter, and we issued inspection reports related to that when they were loading, because we care, that's the most risk significant activity when they're loading. After they're loaded and they're safe in the ISFC pad, there's a triennial safety inspection that's done. That's separate from what the licensee does that we require of them, and they do walkarounds on a daily basis and things like that. Catherine, did you want to cover a little bit about the inspection procedure? Or?
First of all, did you have a specific question on when they were loading or currently for inspection?
No, currently while they're on the ISFC pad, like how frequently, and do you inspect all of them or just a representative sample?
Got it. So as Tony said, it is a triennial inspection. For the safety portion of the inspection, there's a separate security inspection. We do a walk down of the pad, and we walk down pretty much the whole pad. And one of the things that we're taking a look at is the licensee will be required to do like a vent check daily to make sure that the vents, so it's passive cooling, right? So the air goes in through the vents, goes up and out, and that's how these canisters are cooled, and they have to keep a certain percentage of those free from debris so that that cooling can be conducted. So that's one of the main things that we're looking at for that. We're looking at any of the corrective action program. So what that is if there's any kind of issues, they're putting paperwork into the system, identifying corrective actions, and correcting them. So we are reviewing that paperwork process, but anything that is significant that comes up in the meantime, I'm getting a phone call. And we haven't had any safety concerns at this time.
Thank you.
And I can go on.
Sure.
We can look at emergency preparedness as well. And we take a look at their quality assurance program. We took a look at any radiation protection aspects. So we always look at radiological surveys of the pad to see if the radiological conditions are what we're expecting. And those concrete casts provide significant shielding. There's barely anything outside of those casts. And we're also taking a look at the concrete pad, see if there's any degradation. And I think Daryl wants to add more.
Daryl Dunn, NRC. Just to be clear, so the spent fuel is inside of the pictures that you were shown in the presentation. It's a welded stainless steel canister. That is a leak-tight canister. So air doesn't go in and out of that. The overpack is vented. It has an annular space between that stainless steel canister and the inner wall of the overpack, and that allows the convective heat transfer to take place. So the spent fuel has decay heat, and it's passively cooled by the air flowing into the overpack along the outer walls of the canister and then out the vents. Just want to make sure that you understand that the canister is sealed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We do not look directly at the fuel, it's all in there.
No, no.
Do you look at the thickness of the canister?
Say it again?
Do you look at the thickness of the canister?
It's inside the concrete overpack, so
Understood.
we cannot see it.
Right, but then presumably one could use a non-visual approach to measure that.
So that is, Daryl Dunn, NRC. That is done in the design review, okay? And when they get to the period of extended operation, which for Indian Point will be in 2028, because they first loaded in 2008, they will have to implement the aging management programs that are included in the High Storm 100 renewal application, and those are included in Appendix 9A of their final safety analysis report, and that does include inspections of components, including canister for indications of corrosion or stress corrosion cracking.
If memory serves, that's one canister per time for every 5 years?
That's correct.
Thank you. I think Superintendent Trombley, and then I have a wrap-up question. We're going to move on to the next part of our agenda. Superintendent?
Are the the triennial inspections announced or unannounced?
Announced.
Any unannounced inspections, including emergency preparedness?
We always have the ability to do unannounced inspections. We typically do announce, but I think Tony might.
Yep, you got it. We do announced inspections. We can do unannounced if we have some reason to believe that something untoward is happening. But we announce them. Why do we announce them? To ensure that we have logistics associated with it. We can't just walk into the ISFC. It's secure, right? We can get hurt. So, and also to get logistics, paperwork, documentation, procedures, all kinds of things, to make sure that they have staff to be able to withstand our inspectors, to make sure that we can ask our questions and whatever, all the logistics associated with inspections.
And I'll point out one important point is even if an inspection is announced, if there's something going on, whether it's decommissioning or ISFC, we can also do what's called a reactive inspection where we go out at pretty short notice. So they might know we're coming, but they might not get heads
Right,
up.
I would assume, I served as Inspector General in the Air Force Space Command, and they did
You understand.
unannounced, so it was not, you're going in there because there's live ammo, but you can do pretty quick unannounced, and that was the point of the question.
Your point is very well taken. We don't hesitate to do unannounced. You know, Mr. Lockbaum brought up, 6 allegations for Indian Point this year. It's a matter of public record at this point. But might we do or choose to do unannounced inspections for that? Absolutely. And I have authorized many of those.
Thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't take advantage of the NRC's presence to also ask you about the citation that you all made with respect to Holtec's cask design. So could you speak to that, please?
I'll start it off high level, and then Daryl or Tony, if you want to add. So what we're talking about is an uncited violation issued to Holtec. If you go back to December 2022, we had a vendor inspection. We go out and inspect safety-related vendors. So we're at the factory in Camden, and an inspector walks by like an egg crate structure, tic-tac-toe structure that holds those fuel assemblies, and it didn't look right to him. So that long edge, that 14-foot edge, normally should have had a welded seam down it, for the structural integrity, but it had bolts instead. It's like, oh, that doesn't look right. You made a design change. So anyhow, fast forward quite a few months because we really had to analyze it, look at immediate safety concerns, et cetera. And by the way, there were no immediate safety concerns. But what the violations came down to were design control and changing the cask without NRC approval. I mean, there are a lot of other regulatory words that come with that, but that's what it boils down to. So let me turn it over to Tony.
Thank you. Yeah, Tony Dimitriadis. The violation that Paul is referring to came in January 30th, I think it is, 2024. That went to Holtec International in Camden, New Jersey. That is the vendor, the people who actually make the casks. Subsequent to those violations that were issued, I instructed my staff to inspect the sites that actually used the specific models, the High Storm 100, FW, and things like that, model numbers that are there. And we are undergoing those inspections right now. I expect those inspections, and it's not just, there's a number of facilities that are being inspected for this sort of thing. And I expect that inspection to be completed by January 30th, and the inspection report should be issued sometime July or August.
Is that inspection to determine if the design change affected any of the casks that are being used at those sites?
Yes, partially. We already know that there are no safety issues. We're looking to see if there's a compliance issue.
What would the non-compliance be at the site? Just
Potentially, as Paul indicated, Holtec was cited for implementing a change without prior NRC approval.
Because to Darrell's point, we review in detail a cask design. We give that vendor a certificate of compliance. So if they build it exactly like that, they're okay.
Right.
We know how it's going to perform. But if they change the design, in this case Holtec did, they need to come to us for approval to see, so we can verify it still fits in the box.
Right.
And it's going to do all its safety functions that I mentioned. They didn't come to us for that. Right. Hence the design control violation.
But now that you've reviewed the bolts, you've determined if they did come to you prior, you found no safety issues.
Right.
So if they had come to you before making the design change from weld to bolt, you would have approved it? Is that what you're saying?
Want to take that one, Darrell? You probably did the analysis.
No, Darrell Dunn, NRC. I didn't do the analysis. So what's happening now is there are a number of sites that are coming to us with what we call exemption requests. So this is a system now that they have and it's in service and it doesn't fit inside the box because they did this change and it was a change done prior to NRC, or change done without NRC approval. So they have to basically show that this system will still function and meet it still meet its safety functions, in terms of criticality control, thermal, structural analysis, confinement. The NRC has already determined that this would not affect confinement, and it really wouldn't affect criticality because confinement is maintained. So these exemption requests will come in, we will review them, and then eventually Holtec will come to us with an amendment, okay? Because that's the way they should have come to us before. They will come to us. They have a certificate of compliance and they will come to us with an amendment, because if they are making a change that they're not allowed to make, they have to come to us and say, please review this change and approve it. That's called an amendment to the certificate of compliance. They will come to us and they will give us that amendment and we will review it.
Darrell, excuse me, Richard, I just want to follow up a question. Darrell, is it NRC's understanding that the casks that are today at the sites throughout the country, the Holtec casks that have the bolts rather than the welds, is it NRC's understanding that those systems are not compliant?
They're not compliant with the system that we have approved. So they have to come in for an amendment, and the sites that are using them will have to come in for exemptions because those systems are not compliant. And eventually Holtec will have to come to us with an amendment request to review that design as it should have been done from the beginning.
Thank you.
The answer was yes to that question?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they are
The answer-
non-compliant.
And so the ones that are on the asphyxie pad here in,
We haven't determined for the site here yet.
What Tony's saying is the public footprint for how we're going to deal with that enforcement space has not yet been issued for the ones that are on the pad. Dana, do you?
Hypothetically, Darrell, don't leave. Hypothetically, when they come to you for this amendment and you do the review and you determine that, geez, the bolts aren't meeting our safety standards, what recourse do you have now that the fuel is already in this unapproved cask?
So I don't expect that will be the case, first of all, because the safety analysis has already been done by the NRC, and we've determined that, these systems, even in a non-mechanistic tip-over accident, still maintains their safety function. There's no criticality concern. You maintain confinement, and it's an accident, yes, but with a tip-over, there may be some structural deformation of the basket, but things stay, safe in terms of criticality control and confinement. So I don't think that that's going to happen with respect to, the amendment, but we'll have to get the amendment, we'll have to do the review.
Just, again, we talked a lot about the earthquake and, you know, how it may or may not have impacted these fissy pads and the canisters, and we can't really see what's inside them, but we know that they're bolts instead of welds. Or we might not know that yet, but if we were to find out that there were, how do we know that they're actually, that they haven't been critically impacted?
So the only way that this basket would make a difference in terms of design would be a non-mechanistic tip-over accident, so the cask actually falls over. Seismic shaking with fuel assemblies in the basket is not a high enough load to cause damage to the basket, whether it's bolted or welded.
But this is not the first time Holtec's changed the design on you, right? This is about the third or fourth violation at this time.
If you go back a couple of years, you're correct.
Right. Is there a 3 strikes and out policy at the NRC?
Do they have fines?
No, but my point is, shouldn't
I-
the fines escalate? I mean, what it tends to show is that whatever corrective action they're telling you they're taking obviously isn't working, right?
Well, you know, Richard, I understand where you're going, fair point. Devil's in the details of each, but let me say, you have to look at a pattern and the specifics of each violation over a period of time to see if there is a trend and is a pattern.
Right.
And if there is some sort of programmatic level or pattern, we'll engage, whether it's at the site level or corporate level.
There is a pattern. There's a pattern of changing the design without NRC permission.
Well,
And can they
I
use
encourage you to read some of it.
DTF to pay the
I'll
fines?
read some of the background.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I think John had a few follow-up questions.
Sure. Actually, listening, I think Assemblyperson Levenberg had a question, and in my mind, I'm going to ask this question to Rich. So let's hypothetically say there was a licensee that had a violation, a decommissioning licensee that had a violation, and NRC decided to assess a penalty, call it a $1,000 penalty. Could the licensee pay that penalty, that civil penalty, to the NRC or the United States Treasury out of the Decommissioning Trust Fund?
Without legal counsel, I probably should not respond, but my initial, and I would be one of those to initially consider, does it contribute directly to decommissioning? And there would be, in my view, a very indirect, non-defined relationship between that kind of expenditure, the penalty or the interest, et cetera. That would be my perspective as first evaluating such. That would not be the conclusion until we had to go through all of our process.
Understood. And I'm just wondering if you could put Indian Point's decommissioning in context of the other plants. I think you said, was there 23 reactors or 23 sites that are undergoing decommissioning right now that fall under your oversight or auspices in your group?
So there are 23 reactors.
Okay.
Some of them are your larger, more traditional, more current. Others are very, very, in terms of size and even where they've gotten to in terms of completion, they've become rather insignificant.
Okay.
3 facilities were determined to complete license termination. I think it was all last year. That would be La Crosse boiling water reactors and Zion units 1 and 2.
Okay.
So
And-
three of them were.
And I'm just trying to put, I'm sorry, Tony.
Yeah, so Indian Point is 3 of the
Right.
23.
So, and actually, thanks for the math, because I'm not an engineer, just a lawyer. But I guess that's roughly 13% of the decommissioning reactors under NRC review now are Indian Point Unit 1, Indian Point Unit 2. Indian
Well,
Point.
3 divided by 23.
Yeah.
What's 23 times, that's about 36912. It's about 13, what did you say?
Maybe about 13%. So I guess Indian Point actually represents a not insignificant segment of the reactors that your group is looking at in the decommissioning group, in the decommissioning trust group.
Yeah,
It's 13%, I guess.
13%.
Okay,
So without
we'll call it that. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate all the time NRC has given us today and for being responsive to our invitation and questions. Catherine, we really appreciate all the work you do at the site and the way you are maintaining your impartiality throughout the questioning is really commendable. Thank you. And thanks to the whole NRC team. we're now going to move forward. We have a few slides with state agency oversight updates, and then we're going to ask OPEC to join us in a moment for their update. Yeah. So if we could turn to John Sipos for the state agency updates.
Sure. Thank you, and hello, everyone. And I would also like to thank NRC and its staff for attending tonight's meeting and providing presentations on matters of interest to the community and for discussing the federal regulators' role and actions in the decommissioning space in general and the decommissioning space here at Indian Point. And thank you to Catherine, who I think just took a break, for your work as the federal regulators inspector at Indian Point. Decommissioning of a civil nuclear power reactor involves a lot of complexities, and this is really the first operational site in New York State to go through the process. So thanks again. And tonight, Kelly and I will provide a few brief highlights of various state agency actions. And in the interest of time and getting to the public comment portion of the meeting, let's turn to this slide that we have right here. So this is the slide that we show at each of our sessions. This is the Indian Point, New York State tip hotline. And I can report tonight that we have received no calls or concerns on it. But as NRC staff mentioned tonight, and as the colloquy with Tom, I think underscored, it is very important that all workers at the site be assured that they can freely communicate concerns that they have. And in sort of the words of Louis Brandeis, sunlight is a very, very good disinfectant. We have this system. The NRC has its system. I think you heard Brad, the regional attorney, speak about it also. So that is there. Let's go to the next slide, which is the Reuters-Stokes monitoring results. We've shown these in the past, and the takeaway here is that Holtec has voluntarily agreed to retain certain monitors in the village of Buchanan, and the readings that are shown on the graph here are entirely consistent with the readings that we have reported during the decommissioning post-operational period. So this baseline continues. Next slide, please. Third, and we did get into some of this already, the DPS staff has reviewed two items. They're noticed here. The notice of violation regarding language in either the hiring contract or the separation of contract. I think we've discussed that enough. And the second one concerns alpha radiation controls during the segmentation of Indian Point Unit 1. We don't oftentimes refer to alpha. Oftentimes it's more beta and gamma. I guess I would characterize alpha as perhaps a phenomenon of lesser significance, but DPS staff is looking at the corrective action regarding this issue. And again, this is a non-cited violation. Next slide, please. So additional oversight actions, and Catherine and I expressed our thanks from DPS for all your work as the chief inspector at the site. So thank you very much for that while you were out. DPS staff and other state agencies have attended the monthly meetings that we have had with Holtec, where Holtec reviews various project issues with us. And the notable on-site observations, Unit 3 walk down, containment safety walk down, no issues were identified there. And also Holtec is segmenting the Unit 3 cooling water intake system components. And again, no issues have been noted there. There was I would call it a column or a transposition of numbers regarding the last item here, the last bullet. This is on the Unit 1 Financial Assurance Report, and our staff is looking at the corrective actions there as Holtec is working through that. Next slide, please. So here, slide about the pipeline. From time to time, we've been discussing the pipeline at these meetings. This is the Enbridge interstate gas pipeline. Recently, there have been some integrity digs to look at the integrity of the 26-inch pipeline. DPS staff, our gas pipeline safety folks, have been performing on-site visits, and the integrity dig exercise is where a portion of the pipe is excavated to look at it, how it is faring, is it achieving its intended function, and there are some discussions right now about repair or replacement of segment on that, and that is still underway right now, but we wanted to get that out tonight. Next slide, please. And I think that's my opportunity to turn it over to Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Kelly Turturro from New York State DEC. I don't have significant updates from the last meeting. As I've talked about, Holtec has begun the remedial investigation process with the first area, which they term the Lafarge area. They conducted field work in April of 2024 and anticipate submitting a draft report to DEC for DEC's review in July of this year. Next slide, please. There haven't been any changes on our Speedies permit review. Our staff continues to go through the Speedies permit documents that we received from Holtec, reviewing that Speedies permit renewal. Next slide. As I've mentioned before, we continue to oversee the closure and assessment of all tanks on the Indian Point site. And with regard to the facility's air state facility permit, as they've been going through decommissioning activities and removing combustion sources and boilers, they have gotten to the point where their emission source falls below the threshold of an air state facility permit. So as of June 11th, 2024, their air state facility permit was discontinued, and the facility now has a registration. So that is the lowest, a registration is the lowest level from an air perspective of DEC's jurisdiction because of their emission levels at the facility. They currently have one boiler that qualifies under the registration that is used for heating purposes. Next slide. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both very much. Any questions for the state agencies? Yes, Senator Harcum.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Kelly. Just really an educational question for Kelly. Would you take the public through what is an air state facility permit, what the levels are, what that entails? That's a new term to me, and my guess is probably a new term to many.
Okay, certainly, Senator. I'll definitely have to get back to you on emission levels, what qualifies for a registration, what qualifies for an air state facility permit, but I can certainly explain generally. There are 3 levels of permit jurisdiction that New York State DEC has over air emissions. The authority comes from the Clean Air Act, which is delegated from the federal government, from the Environmental Protection Agency. It's delegated to New York State and other states as well to regulate air emissions in the state. The first level of such is what we call a registration. It's very different from a permit process. We call it a ministerial action. So it doesn't rise to the level of a permit process whereby we're reviewing an application, we're going out to public notice, and we're issuing a permit. We use this registration process because the emission levels are so low. They meet a certain standard that allows us to issue a registration. We do it in a variety of programs, in our solid waste program, in our air program. The next level up is called an air state facility permit. And then the most regulatory authority we have is a Title V permit. That is the type of permit that we work very closely with EPA in our review of the permit applications. They review our draft permits. We have a public notice process, and that is the highest level of emissions that a facility might have. But I can certainly get back to you with those numbers because I don't have them at the tip of my fingers.
That would be great, and that was a great explanation. Thank you very much.
Assemblywoman?
Just to follow up, and thank you also, John and Kelly, for that explanation. Just in terms of the, you mentioned that there was some repair or replacement of the pipeline that was maybe being considered or recommended. And I know we got some feedback after the earthquake about what the impact might have been on that pipeline. And I don't know that everybody was super satisfied with what the review process is, but it, again, we were told that, there wasn't really anything that impacted it. How would we know if whatever this potential need for repair or replacement would have had something to do with the earthquake?
We have on the line a representative from Enbridge who can maybe start. We also have pipeline safety staff from our agency. So, John Sheridan, are you with us?
I am, Tom. Yes.
Thank you for joining. We thought there might be a question for you, and sure enough, we have one. And I believe Arpit is on as well from the DPS. So did you hear the question from the Assemblywoman?
I did, and we have an internal team of experts that went out to the site and did a ground disturbance of the pipeline after the earthquake, and we coordinated this with the New York DPS, with Arpit and others, and there was no impact at all. There were no impacts at all to the pipeline, and the pipeline continues to operate safely.
Could you clarify what that means about no ground disturbance and how you know that wouldn't have affected something under the ground?
We use gas detectors to ensure that there was no movement of the pipeline, and those gas detectors came up with a zero level of any type of potential activity that would have occurred from the earthquake. There was zero impact to the pipelines.
And just one more question, which is how quickly were you actually informed about the earthquake that would have had an impact on this particular section of the pipeline? And and how quickly were you able to inspect?
Within that day, we were notified within hours. We were aware of it, and we sent crews out. I think it was later that day, first thing in the morning, to inspect the pipelines.
John, do you want to also speak to your, central ops facility in Texas that sees any pressure drops on your interstate pipelines?
Yes, thank you, Tom. We have a gas control system that operates 24/7, and they monitor the pressures in the line using a SCADA. It's called a SCADA system. If there was an issue with the pipeline, there would be a drop in pressure, and we would be notified immediately. Gas control would be, and in this case, there was no unusual activity once the earthquake, had taken place.
Thank you.
Okay, and then my second question for Kelly is, when will the review of the Speedies permit be complete?
I don't have an estimated time frame for you, but I will certainly keep everybody posted on when we're ready to issue a draft Speedies permit for public review.
And is there any requirement on you for a time frame?
No, we review the information that Holtec submits to us. We often go back and forth with questions, both to Holtec and any other permittee or applicant. So regulatory timeframe on this, but we are trying to get through it as quickly as possible.
Can you just give me a reminder of approximately how long you have been reviewing it?
Yeah, I think we received the application in 2022. But there has been back and forth between DEC and Holtec. We get information, we have questions, they have to submit additional information. I can certainly get you the timeframe.
There are some dates on the slide.
Oh.
Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Deputy Supervisor.
Thank you. Actually, while we have the Enbridge representative available to us, I'm thankful to hear that there was no impact identified at their central monitoring site. However, if they did see a drop in pressure, if they noticed a problem, could we get an answer of like how long it would take for them to shut down that pipeline?
Sure, I'll turn it over to both Mr. Sheridan and also if ARPIT wants to speak to the DPS audit that was done for the time it takes to do the remote shutoff. Go ahead, we'll start with Enbridge.
Sure. If there was a significant drop in pressure, if there was, for instance, a break in the line, we could isolate that section of pipe within, leave it at 6 to 8 minutes. We can shut that section of pipe down, if not sooner.
They have capability to remotely close valves from Houston. Is it Houston or?
It's from Houston. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And we can isolate that section of pipe based on the valves that are located strategically along the pipeline.
This was a point of controversy back when the pipeline was permitted, and that triggered a follow-up audit by the Department of Public Service and ARPIT. I don't know if you want to speak any further or just confirm that the 6 to 8 minutes was something we concluded that in the audit was accurate.
Yes, that's correct. It's 6 to 8 minutes, and that's from also the time. That would also include the time that it takes them to discover the event, that pressure drop. Once they operate the valves, then those valves will close in a minute, And we've done inspections of those valves every year since 2018.
And our audit entailed having people at the control center in Houston, as well as people in the field at the remotely controlled valves. But Senator Harcum, did you have?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I don't want to lead us down the rabbit hole of this issue again, but, there have been some very publicized incidents of ransomware and international hackers going after utility infrastructure. Has that been calculated in the audit or future security planning? What is the redundancy should they lose control of their computer systems in Houston?
Mr. Sheridan, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, Senator, we do have backup. We do have redundancy to address that issue you just mentioned. And we have a team of experts internally that continue to work on the system to improve it if needed. But we do have a system and a team in place. In the event that we need backup, we have it, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, County Legislator?
Yes, thank you. Is this on? Oh,
Yep.
Okay. Just to continue the questioning with regard to the pipeline, with respect to these integrity digs, just because I'm not familiar with the process, how's the pipeline excavated for for purposes of doing these tests to see that it's everything is in working order?
I'll let Enbridge speak to that, and I can let ARPIT, who is on the government side, talk to the role we play to oversee these digs. But why don't we start with answering the question of how the excavation occurs?
Sure. Just to start off, to ensure safety of the pipes, we conduct these regular inline inspections under our integrity management program. These tools used advanced imaging technology to inspect our pipelines, and they offer pinpoint accuracy for features that may require follow-up maintenance. So recently, our inline inspection tool was deployed on the Algonquin 26 auxiliary line. Several anomalies were found. And so, and to be clear, anomalies do not necessarily mean the pipe is compromised, but rather signals further inspection and maintenance is necessary. And so one section of pipe was deemed to be in the need of replacement due to a noticeable amount of metal loss. So the team goes out there, they will expose the pipe, and they will dug up a section of the pipe and is waiting the new pipe section to be pressurized and tested. So we identify, we put eyes on it, and then we expose the pipe, and then we, upon further testing, determine that that section of pipe needs to be cut out, and then it's replaced. But it's hydrostatically tested. Once it's put in place, it's x-rayed before the pipe is installed and put back into service.
And
That's typically how we do that.
Yeah, and before you excavate, the pipe is obviously depressurized, correct?
Oh, I apologize. Yes, the pipeline is depressurized. In this case, there was no gas in the pipeline. This is an auxiliary pipeline that Algonquin has that crosses the Hudson River and the Indian Point footprint.
Thank you. And during these digs, we send staff, field staff out to inspect the work. Arpit, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so we have staff from DPS Pipeline Safety going to the site. They're on-site monitoring. They're ensuring that Enbridge is following their procedures for safe excavation activities, and then also following the integrity management regulations contained in Part 192, Subpart O.
So then these are physical, like they're putting eyes on the pipeline itself. So they're digging it up, they're taking a look at it. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but you said that they depressurized the line. I believe you said the Algonquin line was an auxiliary line, so maybe that.
Yes, these are the lines that are a few decades old. They actually do they predate the Indian Point facility? They run through the property, and this is not the new expanded line that was permitted in the 2014-15 timeframe.
Okay. Thank you for that point of clarification. And then I guess my last question is just, and I think this has been, basically answered, but are there any, safety concerns regarding, excavating or, doing these, exposing the pipeline? I know even if it's to ensure that everything is in good working order, but
Yeah, I would
in
just
doing
say-
that is,
Right.
that in itself raise any safety concerns?
No, I mean, if this kind of work wasn't happening, I think we'd have safety concerns, right? The integrity management program required under PHMSA regulations requires the pipelines to do these inline inspections, to find these anomalies. If the anomalies exist, that's when they have to go in and do the work to then physically get eyes on it and determine what the right remedial actions are to keep the pipeline safe. So these are the kinds of things that are ahead of having an incident. So in our view, this is pipeline safety at work.
Thank you.
All right. So if our guest from NRC could trade places with Holtec, we're going to ask Holtec to join us.
Tom, I'm sorry, while they're coming up, I just wanted to know if any of that work that's being done by Enbridge is in preparation for Project Maple.
I don't believe so, but I'll let Enbridge speak to that themselves.
Okay, thanks.
No, it is not. This is strictly the maintenance program, as Tom mentioned, part of our integrity management program for the pipelines.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Frank Spagnolo, I'm the Site VP at Indian Point. We'll go through the agenda. So we'll talk about the work that we completed since our last meeting. It's only been about 6 weeks, so we'll just cover that quickly. And then we are going to talk about what we're doing through the end of the year. We'll talk about the NRC updates, answer some of the questions that came up earlier, and then we'll have a workforce safety update. So the next slide So we'll start with Unit 2. We've been talking about the cavity liner. The picture there on the left is the Unit 2 cavity. You can see some of the steel plates that have been welded in place. We are just finishing up coating. All welding is complete. The coating has been reapplied. Our next step will be to clean out the rest of the equipment that's in the cavity, scaffold, the man lift, the ladder that you can see there. We'll remove the head, land that back in a storage space for segmentation, and then we'll slowly fill the cavity up over the next month or so to make sure we don't have any leakage. For Unit 3, the post saw and the accessories have been removed, and we're continuing to remove chips. And you'll see in the next picture, a nice picture of it. And the lower internal segmentation now will continue using the gantry saws. So we had a pole saw in place that basically cut from the inside out. Now we'll go from back to the gantry saw, cutting from the outside in. And the next slide, the first picture there is the Unit 2 head. And I already talked about, we'll refill the cavity and we'll segment the head throughout the rest of the year. So for Unit 3, the picture on the right is actually a really good picture of the greater than Class C waste. As you can see, it's all standing up nice and neat in what we call A boxes. It's in temporary storage. And that really is the entire lower internal core barrel that's been segmented using the post saw. And the box to the left of the nice, neat stacked parts are all the chips that were collected. That's another box full of chips. So to the left of that, you see what remains of the core. It's the bottom 40 inches, I think, which will now segment that. That'll be the remainder of the greater than Class C material that's on the Unit 3, inside Unit 3 completely. And then we will start our cast campaign to cask all that and put in the asphyxie pad, and that'll start in August and go through the end of the year. Once that's done, then we'll take the remainder of what's the far left of that picture, the lower core barrel, we'll invert it, and then we'll segment it using the post saw, and that'll just be Class A and B, C waste. And that'll be stored on site, and the A waste will be shipped. So Unit 1 demolition, so this is inside the Unit 1 VC. So we're still cutting RCS loops. We've completed 14 loop, we're continuing on 13 loop. We are working on 12 loop, removing vertical sections. Those are all below the main elevation. We're also working the 11 boiler asbestos abatement. You can see that in the lower picture. The tent, we're doing a full abatement on the upper drum and all the risers, which you'll see in the next picture. And the upper picture there is an example of what a react coolant pump, a Unit 1 react coolant pump look like. That's cut out of the system and is getting ready to be packaged. And right now, we're removing interferences associated with 11 and 12 boiler. It's really ductwork and electrical conduits that are running. We're, like, for the next slide, you'll see that that's what our goal is for the rest of the year, is to remove all of the, remove the rest of the RCS looping for the 11 through 14 boilers, lower elevations all the way up to the top of the reactor where the steam generators are. We'll complete the abatement of 11 steam drum, and then we'll remove the risers and downcomers. So the picture on the top shows a good picture of what the risers look like. Those are 8-inch, 4-inch pipes, about 14 of them, and that's connecting the bottom drum, the mud drum, to the top drum, the steam drum. And that is an example of what a Unit 1 steam generator look like, different than a standard classic Westinghouse steam generator. So what we're doing on 11 is we have an abatement for all those risers. Obviously, built in the 50s, it does have asbestos in it. We're completing the abatement on 11, and then we'll rig 11, then we'll do 12. We'll work our way around the circle until we're done. And but we'll be focusing on 11 boiler for the rest of this year, and we may start the abatement of 12 boiler by the end of the year. So go back to that, sorry. The bottom picture there, I'm gonna actually use that. I'll come back to that picture when we talk about the violation on the NRC issues. But that's a picture of a RCS loop that's been cut. And you can see it underneath where the two pipes are separated is the cutting tool. And it's just basically like a pipe cutter. It's a hydraulic pipe cutter that runs around. And so we'll get back to that in a second, but I just wanted to put that picture in there. So we're also in the middle of cleaning the spent fuel pool racks on Unit 3. The Unit 2 racks, as you know, have been cleaned and they've been removed and shipped off-site to Texas. So right now, out of the 12 racks, 8 of the 12 are complete. We have received the rack lifting device, and for the rest of the year, the rest of this month, we'll be cleaning the last of them, and then we'll remove the 12 racks and package them and ship them off-site. Conventional plant demo. So, like I talked about last time, I introduced the conventional plant demo. That's the next slide, sorry. We have completed the Unit 3 feed water heater removals. We have removed any station batteries that have been available to be removed. We've commenced the prep work for the Unit 2 feed water heater removal, and right now we're preparing for removal of Unit 3 dock components. We're also removing retired station security equipment as we have the ability, as we have the resources to do. So the entire path, if anybody's been through the plant and they've gone through security, that has been demoed, that building has been gutted, all the security equipment is removed, the access is now in the GSB. And you can see in the upper left picture, that's one of the BREs, the towers, that's been removed. That was needed at Palisades. And then you can see the picture on the upper right, that's the path demo. All the gates are gone, and we're packaging up all the bomb detectors, X-ray machines, and metal detectors. And the lower picture is a close-up of what one of the feed water heaters looked like after we segmented it and right before we lifted it out of place. So what we're doing through the end of the year, we've got a huge crane set up on the dock. You'll probably be able to see it from the village here. Was used previously in the GSB to replace the air conditioning units. That dock is the crane is necessary to remove the Unit 3 circ pumps and the Unit 3 traveling screens. Those are examples of them in the right and left picture. It really doesn't do it justice. The pumps are probably 30-foot long shafts, and the traveling screens are 40-foot deep, solid stainless steel traveling screens. So the crane will be used to remove all that large equipment, then we'll we'll return the crane to Bay Crane. Everything else will be smaller to remove. We're also going to remove the Unit 1 river water pumps, which are smaller pumps in context. And the Unit 2 feed water heater removal will progress as well as resources allow. Up at gas turbine 2-3, we'll start demoing part of the berm that was around the big GT23 fuel oil tank, and we will remove one of the underground dropout tanks. And on gas turbine 1, we're going to remove some of the external interferences so that we can remove the lube oil reservoir removal and remove the underground dropout tank there. And that's part of our MOSF commitment with DEC. So that was it. That's all I had on the work that was done and the work we're doing through the end of the year. For the NRC inspection, since the last meeting, we've only had 2. Pretty much talked about them. In May, the NRC was here for the financial assurance inspection, and that continues. She also did a RAD occupational exposure review, had a meet and greet really with the new ECP manager, and a RAD waste shipping documentation review. And the inspection this week was focused on financial assurance, as we were talking about, and the plant walkdowns. Okay, so for the violations, we didn't talk about the first one, so I'll get into that in a little bit of detail. So the words that are up there are basically right out of the violation document. So basically, if we go back to that picture on the slide for the Unit 1, right there. So this isn't exactly the pipe that we were cutting, but it's an example of what we were cutting. So Unit 1 is unique. Unit 1 has been shut down for over 50 years, so beta gamma is not the real concern. Alpha was because of the decay. So we had talked about it for probably a year before we actually started getting into this, before we actually exposed any of the internals of the RCS pipes. Never been exposed. But when we actually exposed the first pipe, like I said, it wasn't this one, but this is an example. The RP that was on station and the RP supervisor basically reached into that pipe to get a sample so that we could determine what we're looking at. And they actually violated the procedure that allowed them to do that. They should have had a different form of alpha monitoring. And we should have known. So take full responsibility for that. That was easy. We should have never been there. We did do a work group evaluation, which is basically anytime we make some sort of an error, human error, any kind of an error, we'll do an evaluation, determine why it happened, and then most importantly, determine what actions are taken to prevent it from reoccurring. This one is very easy to prevent reoccurring. Everybody's been trained on the procedure. The individuals have been, interviewed and coached. So we basically checked for compliance with our procedure. The gaps were identified were not all the RP technicians providing coverage were in the same monitoring or dress requirements as the workers. The workers were covered this entire time. It was really just the RP that was taking the sample. So a portable alpha Frisco was obtained and placed in the field to ensure it was available for use upon exiting the posted alpha level 3 alpha area. All smears and hair samples are being counted for alpha and beta. And all personnel entering the alpha contamination area wearing lapel air samples for internal monitoring. So that continues on. We'll continue that through the end of the year until all the RCS piping has been cut and removed. And further inspections have identified no issues with our practices. The other one, I'm not going to read that because we've already talked about it. So I'm going to get into my draft of our document that we are getting ready to send to the NRC, which talks about our corrective actions to steps that are taken and results that were achieved. So I'll do a preface. I'm not going to try to downgrade this, but I signed both of these documents myself. I was separated from CDI and I was hired by HDI. HDI was a standard non-disclosure agreement. My take on it was protecting intellectual property. So, but I won't discount it. Our lawyers agreed. The lawyers that wrote this, they agreed that that could lead to a chilling or. So what we've done, we've taken the actions that you're requesting the NRC to take. So that's the first thing. So we did a work group evaluation on this again. We did an extended cause that reached out to Pilgrim, Oyster, and Palisades, as was discussed. It's impacted all decommissioning units. It also impacted all Holtec International for the non-disclosure agreement, all Holtec International employees. The extended condition review of additional separation employment agreements confirmed that discouraging language was not prevalent in other separation agreement documents. The review of the separation agreement, use of unnamed separation agreements were discontinued after the notification, so that was the first thing. We did stop using that, obviously. The separation agreement was amended after May 1st of 2024, so anyone that had received a separation, which no one at Indian Point has, would have a new document. The confidentiality or the non-disclosure agreement was amended on May 8th. Immediately, within a week, we created training in what we use for our learning system, learning management system, LMS. It was, I don't know, it took about 20 minutes just to read through. It really reiterated your rights as a worker and the process for reporting anything to not only the NRC, anything. Employee concerns, all the paths that are out there for any worker at a decommissioning unit as well as Holtec International. And that went out to all employees in Holtec International to clear up anything for all current workers. That was completed on May 31st of this year, and HR physically mailed a letter to every former HDI employee that signed a letter separation agreement to their house to inform them of their rights under the NRC rules. So that action has been completed on May 2nd. So like the NRC said, we're working through to make sure we've captured everything in here. We didn't miss anything, and then we will sign it. I'll sign this, and we will put it, Gene Fleming will sign it, and then we will send it to the NRC, and it'll be in Adams. Okay. Just one more slide here on safety. We did have one first aid. It was a very minor individual just getting dressed and actually locked up his finger as he was putting his boots on. Common, everybody did that today coming in. It does happen. And really not a whole lot of learnings out of that one, unfortunately. But we did document it as a first aid because care was given. Other than that, the doses in the lower right is as listed. We are below our goal. We put our goal in there for the second quarter and our year goal. And that is all that I had.
Thank you, Frank. I believe Senator Harkam has a question.
Thanks, Frank. I have two questions and a comment. First are easy ones. When Rich was here, I was working with him. Colleague of mine, the minority ranker on my committee, Senator Dan Steck, was a nuclear engineer in the Navy. He is really jazzed by what you guys are doing and would love a site visit. And I was working on that with Rich. I think it got lost in the transition. Is that something we can do this summer to bring him down?
Send me an email. I'm sorry, talking to him. Send me an email and we could talk about dates, potential dates.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Labor, how many workers are on the site right now?
Hasn't changed from the last one. I'd say about 450 last time.
And do you expect that to hold steady through the end of the year?
I don't know. I'll be honest, right? So if you've read the financial report, if you compared it to last year's to this year's, if you look at my 2024 budget for the three trusts combined, 1, 2, and 3, from 2024 to 2029, I've roughly had $1 billion in the budget, and that's now $500 million, right? As Rich discussed, in order to make the trust last another extra 8 years, you needed to reduce spending up front. If you retire tomorrow, you can't take 10% of your money out. It's not going to make it to the end. So we're using the same concept. So we're looking at what my budget is for next year and trying to make a decision. I'll work with my team and we'll discuss it. And I have not finalized the budget. That's not going to be due until October. So it'll be a while.
Okay. Just lastly, a comment. You've heard all the comments on the NDAs. You know, I'm not going to scream and shout, but you know, you and Rich come here every meeting, and we thank you for that. And you always talk about Holtec's commitment to safety, and now we're hearing that, you know, there's a corporate culture that really is more intent on secrecy around these issues. So, you know, it just, to me, goes to credibility. So when we sit here and we talk about safety and you put numbers up and things like that, you know, I'm glad you've taken corrective measures with the current workforce. But it, you know, it really, to me now, is an issue of credibility and confidence in that, you know, when we talk about safety and we're sitting here, you know, we're getting the real message as opposed to what is that my time? You know, what the corporate communications folks want us to hear. So I just put that out for you.
Assemblywoman?
Thank you, and I just want to echo my colleague in the Senate's comments. Thank you for those. I just wanted to, you had mentioned sort of, you know, needing to lengthen the time. Is that based on just the market and the market forces that have reduced those, funds, or also the expenses that were much higher than, I think, anticipated or that were projected? And to what do you owe those higher than anticipated or projected expenses?
So in order to accommodate, our plan is to basically push partial site release 8 years. So in order to accommodate having money left at the end, we had to push the end date 8 years, right? So that's in the documentation that we provided. So there are still going to be bills that are still going to have to be paid, whether we are doing any work or no work, right? Taxes, insurance, power, you know, all those bills are going to be paid. So now we're going to wind up paying those for a longer period of time. So we have to reduce what we're taking out of the trust starting next year in order to make that money stretch. It would be like, you know, making all your plans to retire at 65, and then you want to retire at 62, you're going to have to change your lifestyle or put more money in. There's no more money going in, so you have to take less money out. It's really the same type of concept. We had to make the money stretch, so we're taking the the bills that we have to pay, regardless of what's going on, security, there are bills, we have to pay bills. So that now those bills, the 8 years of those bills are going to be paid.
No, but I was actually asking about the expenditures to date. Basically, to what did you owe that reduced amount that's actually in the fund? You said that it was, I think, less than you had anticipated at this point.
That's not what I said.
It isn't?
No. I said my original, if you look at last year's report,
Yeah.
last year's annual report that we submitted in March.
Maybe you didn't say it, but I think somebody else had mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
That there
No,
was
I don't
less money
consider
in
that
there.
to be part of that factor at all. So.
I see, okay. And then another question, just in terms of the processes that you had mentioned, the racks being cleaned. So what happens, how do those get cleaned? What is the procedure for cleaning the racks?
Isn't it, basically, each of these racks are, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 by 8. And we have a brush size for the 8 by 8, and there's a pressure washer, and we use water in the spent fuel pool to clean the racks. We're just cleaning all the debris off of the racks, and then we'll pull the rack out. We'll do a survey first, make sure there's nothing in there. We'll do an underwater survey, and we'll pull the rack up, and then we'll do an out of the water survey. Make sure we have the requirements to ship. We'll package it into a bag. It really just go into a bag, and we showed pictures of the Unit 2 racks getting shipped.
But that's like just recirculating water
Yeah, pretty much.
that you just is total up to that, whatever, 1.5 million gallons or whatever. Is that
Yeah,
just part of that?
we actually had to add water to the spent fuel pool to get it to be able to put the pump back in service in order to have enough suction to to clean these racks.
I see. And so just out of curiosity, if the water had been discharged, how would you have been doing that?
Well, we wouldn't have discharged it until we were done with this anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. County Legislator Smith.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and thank you for the report, Mr. Spagnola? Spagnola. I wanted to start by just kind of off the topic here, but just, we recently, as you know, approved a 5-year pilot agreement with Holtec that, in my opinion, goes a long way towards, providing much needed economic relief for, our local communities here, the county, Buchanan, the school district, and so I want to thank your company for that, because we were concerned after the last agreement had ended that we may not be in the position to, or that, the loss of the funding would be, how that's going to impact the community. So you've been good partners with the community on that, so I want to thank you for that. I did have a question / comment with regards to the the discussion surrounding the NDAs, and thank you for the measures that you've taken in what seems to be a fairly short amount of time to correct that. And with respect to making sure that your employees are aware of their rights. Do you feel that, well, not do you feel, but is this going to be something, as far as like education goes, because as you sat here, so you heard, the comments around the room. It's one thing to say, well, these are their rights, and maybe it's, listed on a website somewhere or what have you. But one of the things that is, this is my colleague on the Board of Legislators, one of the things that we are, often very keenly engaged in is making sure that when we pass a new law, or we're considering, a new policy, that we engage in, what we consider to be, or what we would hope to be, enough of a, sort of a public education campaign, just to make sure that everybody, knows what's happening, what we're considering doing, and how that impacts them. So that my question is, I guess, does Holtec have future plans with regards to making maybe this like sort of a regular part of your employee engagement, as far as, what their rights are, making sure that, everybody, not just, sort of a one-off, but making sure that this is something that is continued, so that, former, current employees, new employees, they know that, there's going to be an NDA, but that doesn't mean that if there's something that they need to, they feel they need to go to the NRC or the authorities about, that they would be prohibited, because I think that it can be, I don't know about the, the culture, but I think it can be something that, as an employee who isn't really involved in, the sort of the politics or the milieu that at the, administrative and the managerial level are, that they really, that they understand that if they, if they feel that they really needed to, say something, that they would feel empowered, that they would be educated on that and they would feel empowered to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of initial training. We call it general employee training. NRC Form 6, I'm terrible with these forms, but there's I've been at the plant 34 years. I've been trained on my rights to speak to the NRC in various forms. It was never a question in my mind when I'm signing these forms. And I know it's not a question in a lot of the minds, but it might be a question in some. So we do have quarterly all-employee meetings. I stop all work in the plant. We bring everybody up to the cafeteria and we talk about it. We've talked about it before. We talk about it again. New employees that come in, they will, it'll be part of the general employee training. We do have weekly tailgates where we have discussed it. We took it serious because we didn't really think that it was a problem. Yeah, we didn't even identify it. Our lawyers wrote that, and it was never intended to discourage anybody from doing it. It was really to discourage sharing intellectual property with anyone. So, but those are things that we do on a routine basis.
I'd like to try to reserve roughly a half an hour for public statements, which will bring us to 9:15 if we start that now. So maybe just take one or two.
I just have one more.
Yeah.
So you brought up at the last meeting about the lawsuit and the trust, paying it out of the trust. And I didn't know. I'll be honest, I was honest. I don't know. I didn't have the answer to that question. But yeah, I do have the answer to the question. After the meeting, I did talk to finance. I talked to the president. I talked to my regulatory. We have flagged that bill to whatever lawyer we're using to not be reimbursed out of the trust at this time. So if that changes, we'll let you know. But that bill right now, whatever our lawyers are charging us is being paid out of Holtec International, and that is sitting there, and then we'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, quickie,
Yeah.
since we're running out of time.
There's no such thing, Richard.
Not with you, yeah. It goes on and
Well,
on.
so what can you tell me about the scope of lobbying that was charged to the Decommissioning Trust Fund?
I don't exactly know. I'll be honest. I have a bi-weekly phone call with our lobbyist. I know he talks to Tom and Tom. I don't exactly know what he talks about.
Okay.
I can't answer
Can you,
that question.
can you answer that question next time we reconvene?
He talks to me sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
So might have a better getting an answer out of the rest of the group that's in Albany.
There may be some people who aren't here that are also being lobbied. Could you answer the question next time?
Put it on. Try. I don't know.
I am sure that when he spoke with the senator and the assembly member, it pertained to the legislation, no?
Right. I'm sure he didn't only speak to people who are pro the legislation.
I'm sorry?
I'm sure he didn't only speak to people who are pro the legislation.
I assume that's what a lobbyist says, but for
That's-
us, it's a wide range. It includes the meeting logistics, agenda topics, et cetera.
Can I
Yeah,
say one
please.
thing? New York State Ethics Commission logs, lobbyist expenditures, all that, so that's public information.
I know. Actually, I'm a I'm a registered lobbyist myself, actually. But what we don't know is what's charged to the Decommissioning Trust Fund. Right? We know what activities are occurring, but we don't know what's being charged to the fund. And that's what I'm asking. So second question, how do you know you get a good deal out of Holtec International on spent fuel
I'm sorry, I didn't
management?
understand. How do I know?
How do
The
you
audience,
know?
we're getting a little bit of background
Yeah.
from the audience.
How do you
folks
know
could quiet down.
you're getting a good deal, a good price from Holtec International on, casks and other spent fuel management?
don't have
things.
an answer for that.
You don't know?
I don't have an answer for that specific question. You didn't ask me. You asked me a rhetorical question of how I know if I'm getting a good deal. I don't know what other people pay. I don't. It's not. I'm not in manufacturing, so I don't know.
So do you take whatever price they give you?
I really don't have any answer to that question right now.
Well, I think, with respect, it's kind of an important question. Because we want to make sure that this decommissioning trust fund is not being wasted on large profits for Holtec International. So if you can't answer the question, I think that's a problem.
That's your opinion.
I'm sure other people have a similar opinion.
And just, I don't doubt it. I'm telling you I can't answer that question right now.
Do you benchmark against other facilities' prices?
I can't answer any of those questions.
All right, well, that was quick. There we go.
Well, I wasn't prepared to answer that question. I don't have purchase orders in front of me to answer any of those questions.
No, I'm not asking for numbers.
Okay, Richard, I think it's a fair thing for you to write to the NRC about as they evaluate and review the DTF and accounting. It's a fair thing to request in Catherine's audit. I'd like to move on now to the public statement. I'm sorry, Superintendent?
Sorry, just one.
Yeah.
One quick question. Frank, obviously we want people to have the right to report any concerns they have. Was a portion of the NDA, and if you can't speak to this, I understand, but concerns of mine might be that there is some intellectual property within a nuclear power plant that a bad actor could gain information about design and nuclear technology that we don't want out there. Was that any consideration of the general approach to the NDA? In other words,
security reasons.
Yeah, it's more security related.
Yeah.
Not really. That would have been.
Okay.
So more
in
commercial
the
related.
entry,
Okay.
to get unauthorized access to the plant, part of the, personal health questionnaire and,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom Kaczmarek to run us through the public statement portion of the meeting.
And I'm just going to say one quick statement. I think this was one of the better meetings this evening. It was very informative. The NRC did a fantastic job. Thank you very much. There was a lot of good questions. There was a lot of good back and forth. And I really think, like I said, this was one of the better meetings this evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Tom?
Okay, we'll start quick here. Andrew Bulakowski, you'll be the first to speak, followed by Matthew Mack and Jerry Rivers. As Andrew, as you're approaching the mic, just a reminder of some ground rules here. There will be a 3-minute time limit. I will give you a 30-second notification, and we'll cut you off at 3 minutes to allow some other folks to speak, all right? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you and speak tonight. My name is Andrew Bulakowski. I am here speaking on behalf of over 100,000 union carpenters, radiation protection technicians, facilities technicians, millwrights, pile drivers, floor layers from the North Atlantic states and the Eastern Atlantic states. It's bad enough that in a society that has a constant demand for increased power, that Indian Point is being decommissioned. But by stopping the release of the tritium-infused water, hundreds of good-paying union jobs were lost. This treated water is held to a higher standard than EPA specifications and has been ongoing for over 70 years with no detriment to the Hudson ecosystem. This has a tremendous detriment to the economy locally in the state of New York. Housing and lodging suffer, bars and restaurants suffer, not to mention the loss of tax revenue from all of the skilled labor that have to look elsewhere for employment. Because of the state's decision to stop the release, 119 rad techs were cut to 44, a loss of 75. 24 carpenters and decon techs lost their jobs. Countless good-paying other union jobs were lost. I can't speak for the other trades because I don't have those numbers. I would ask that the decision be reversed and allow an above-standard, closely monitored release of treated water to resume. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Mack?
name is Matthew Mack. I'm the site manager for Champion at Indian Point. I'm not here to talk about the bill that was passed. I'm not here to talk about the release of water. I'm not here to talk about options of storing the water on site. Every DOB meeting, this seems to be the only focus except for tonight. The work that has been accomplished on site has been, this gets discussed by Frank, but it seems no one cares. We never talk about that. Tonight, I'd like to change that. One thing I hear in each of these meetings, except for tonight, is a safe and prompt decommissioning of Indian Point. I can assure you that will not happen without the men and women that sit behind me in the blue shirts. This team that has been assembled to decommission IPEC is the best I've ever been a part of. Their skills, knowledge, attention to detail, questioning attitude, and most of all, their focus on safety is unmatched. They own safety and they own their work. Everyone behind me knows we talk about safety in our morning brief every morning. Champion and Holtec pride themselves on what we've created on and off the site. Work gets accomplished safely, error-free, in a family-like atmosphere. The way all the trades work on site as a team, helping one another, looking out for one another, is an awesome thing to see and to be a part of. Not all the craft members could be here tonight, but I'd like to recognize the ones that are. Local 279 carpenters, please stand up. Stay standing, guys, I'm not done. Local 3 electricians, please stand up. Local 137 operating engineers, please stand up. And last but not least, Local 40 iron workers, please stand up. The 3 minutes isn't enough time to talk about all of you, but that's all allowed to me. So this is dedicated to you. We talk about it every morning. You guys are the best, be the best, every day, every task, every project. And thank you for letting me be part of this team. Your awesome work, your dedication to this project may not be talked about here, but it does not go unnoticed on site. Without you, there's no safe and prompt decommissioning of IPEC. So thank you for everything you do. Tonight is about you and all the work you have accomplished so far. Don't let your guard down. There's still a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Next is Jerry Rivers, followed by Charles Kosis and John Bell. Is Jerry Rivers with us this evening? Charles, apologies if I was saying your last name wrong. Oh, good.
Okay, so my name is Charlie Kosis. I retired from Indian Point in 2021 at the closure as the training manager. I currently teach college physics and chemistry classes. I tell people I'm semi-retired when they ask me what I do. And I really hadn't given a lot of thought to this place, hadn't been down. And then in a weird coincidence, I actually know somebody up here. We were doing a lake cleanup, and I didn't really know what the whole basis of the conflict between the state, the community, and the plant was. And I found out, and then I got a call from Brian, a guy that I've known for 30-some years, saying about this, and to say some words. All right, so prior to training, I held positions as a senior reactor operator, radiation protection technician, and an emergency planning engineer. I have a master's in health physics. I'm a past president of the Greater New York chapter of the Health Physics Society, and I'm a veteran. I was a Navy nuke like so many people in this. I live northwest to here a bit. I commuted. I happen to live where I grew up, where my wife grew up. I love this area. Didn't come down here because we had roots up there. It was also a little more expensive at the beginning of my career, but I could have afforded to come down, but we had roots up there. But I spent more of my awake time down here for many years than in my own home, you know, because I worked long hours. By the way, best lunch food in the world, I think, right around this area. I never worked for Holtec, and no offense, I don't even know who the people are other than people that were former workers with me. I don't really care at all about your financial outcomes at all. It doesn't make any difference to me one way or the other. The people that I know who work with Holtec are going to be fine no matter what. All right. By the way, retire, guys. It's great. All right. But all seriousness, they're going to be fine. Nuclear workers are still. I can't have a LinkedIn account because I get like 20 jobs an hour offers and stuff like that. It's crazy. So they're going to be fine no matter what happens if this is delayed, and hopefully with enough infrastructure work, the union folk will also, you know, probably a bigger hit on them. Honestly, really a bigger hit on them. But I do care about this community and the state in general, and I care about science. So first, let me be clear that I've never met an anti-nuclear person that has any ulterior motive other than they're worried about the science of it and their health. Never, ever once. And actually, I probably generally had a lot more politically in common on other issues with those folks than my colleagues, to be frank. All right. So there's no ulterior motives here, and I respect your fears and concerns, but I'm a person of science. I understand a lot of the concerns over tritium, which just floored me when I heard that was the thing is.
30 seconds.
Oh, sure, sorry here, okay. But this is not something that is unknown. We've been working with nuclear power for 80 years, you know, like 80 years, and it's been studied a lot, and it actually continues to be studied. And I really don't know why you would delay this thing, because ultimately it's going to delay the return. And what this community really needs is some kind of like industry in here that's going to pay sustainable taxes. And I'm lucky I have my children and grandchildren living in the area. It's rare for a New York retiree to say that. But in order for them to stay here and thrive in this community, you're going to have reasonable taxes, work, and support of local businesses. And I think the best way to do that is not I don't know where the science is that supported this law. I'm curious because I haven't found anything that supports it. But I'll go back to not being affected by this at all. I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of this. And if anybody knows a peer-reviewed journal that supports putting a lower than EPA limit on tritium, please let me know, because I've been scouring the internet trying to find anything that's out there, and I'm coming up with nothing, okay? So with that, thank you for your time, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is John Bell, followed by Deborah Porter and Lisa Wentz. John Bell, are you with us?
Yep, he's coming.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me up here. Full disclosure, I'm a lifetime Buchanan resident. I lived here from the day I was born until today. I had a 34-year career at Indian Point as a senior nuclear production technician. I have gone back part-time, first as a procedure writer, now I'm a job planner. My family grew up here. My parents raised 9 kids in Buchanan. We lived on the river. We swam in the river. We water skied in the river, all while Indian Point was operating. Not one person in our family has any health problems that are a result of Indian Point. I was totally upset, of course, when the agreement was reached to shut the plants down. Now I'm even further enraged at the law that's been passed discriminating against Indian Point from discharging any water into the Hudson River. It's going to slow down the whole process for us as a village to recover from this, having land released. And then, you know, and the guys already mentioned all the jobs that it's cost. We need to get this thing going. It was agreed to be a safe, prompt decommissioning of Indian Point, and that is not happening right now as a result of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah Porter. Followed by Lisa Wentz and Nancy Van.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes. So I actually wanted to talk about the decommissioning trust funds, believe it or not. So change of pace. As that we were told, and as I knew before I got here, they were funded by higher electric bills. Maybe not taxes, but individual, hardworking New Yorkers paid more money for electricity to fund the decommissioning trust funds for Indian Point. And at the time that Holtec bought the plant, those funds equaled $2.4 billion. And I think what we've heard tonight here, I would call transparency theater. It was not really transparency. And I'm going to go back to April 15th, 2019, which was when the membership interests of the Indian Point entities were sold by Entergy to Holtec. And at that time, the agreement by which the membership's interests were sold was filed with the PSC in a redacted form, and virtually every term of that contract relating to the trust funds was blacked out with a magic marker. So we don't know what the deal was at its inception. And I requested a copy of that from the PSC and the NRC, and the NRC didn't respond to my FOIA request, and the PSC wrote me back saying that it was a confidential business information that would put them at a competitive disadvantage if they disclosed to me what the terms of that deal were. I was pretty shocked by that. I filed an appeal. Haven't gotten that decided yet. And I just want to talk about what's happened. Right at the time that the Decommissioning Trust Fund was created and transferred to Holtec, well, actually when it was transferred to Holtec, excuse me, the Holtec asked immediately for exemptions from the rules for decommissioning trust funds, and Mr. Sipos is nodding because he wrote a letter objecting.
30 seconds.
I'm going to make this quick. And the NRC granted exemptions because they said there was going to be plenty of money. But in the last report, they said, as for Indian Point 2's trust fund, that they were 20% or more than 20% over budget. And they had spent more than half of this money on spent fuel management. The exemptions were granted were for spent fuel management and site restoration. And the NRC just said, go ahead. So I'm concerned that we aren't going to have enough money in the end.
Ms. Porter,
Yes, I'm sorry.
that's your time.
Okay. Can I just make one other quick point? I just want to say that they kept saying that the trustee has a fiduciary duty, but the fiduciary duty runs to the beneficiary of the trust fund. And the trust fund beneficiary here is Holtec. It's not us.
Thank you. Next is Lisa Wentz, followed by Nancy Van, and finally Daniel Cook.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Wenz. I'm a fairly new Buchanan resident, but I've been attending these meetings ever since we moved here, being a lover of the river. And I've heard so many different perspectives, and I think that's really wonderful that we have a bit of checks and balances. But what I've not really heard is a great deal about how the two largest stakeholders, that being the Village of Buchanan and the Hendrick Hudson School District, are going to make ends meet after these pilot agreements and the cessation funds end. I commend the Hendrick Hudson School Board and Superintendent Trombley and the Buchanan Board of Trustees and Mayor Knickerbocker and the representatives of Holtec for coming to agreements that will continue the pilot agreement for several years to come, especially since things are slowing down now and lawsuits are pending. Both the Hendrick Hudson School District and the Village of Buchanan have lost major percentages of their budgets due to closure. For the next several years, the school district in Buchanan will thankfully benefit from the pilot program, but the decreasing cessation fund will run out in about 2 or 3 years, I believe, if that's correct. The fund was established by New York State to reduce the impact on communities when nuclear plants close. I wonder, though, with current litigation and the pause on Holtec, whether those cessation funds can be extended. We were told, I think at the last meeting, that they could not be, that they would most likely not be renewed. But if it was put in place with the idea that the decommissioning would happen a little quicker, can something be done? I also understand that our fuel canisters can be taxed, and that does provide some financial relief, but what about the water that is sitting there now waiting? Can that be taxed? And is that part of legislation that you would be willing to work on? So I'm here tonight to urge our elected officials, both state and federal, to consider some form of legislation that will support communities like ours, not only in Buchanan, but throughout the United States, and something similar to the Stranded Act that was introduced by Senator Tammy Duckworth. This legislation that would provide long-term
30
financial
seconds.
assistance to communities affected by stranded nuclear waste. Our immediate community is housing the waste and therefore should be provided with resources lost by state and federal decisions to house this waste on our site. We also should have safety resources put in place for as long as that waste is on site. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Van?
Hi, my name's Nancy Van, and I live in Peekskill, about 2.5 miles from Indian Point, although Peekskill doesn't have any representation on this board. We are subject to the risks that come from Indian Point. Not only am I a cancer survivor, but my partner is a cancer survivor, and every single pet I've had that has died since 1997 that I've had here has died of cancer. There are well-documented cancer clusters, and I am sympathetic with people who need jobs, but I hope that the people who said that they hadn't been able to find any information about tritium will look at the 2 webinars that we had and the last presentation to this board. That wasn't what I was going to speak about. What I wanted to ask about was following up on Dana Levenberg and Colin Smith's questions on the pipeline. I understand that it was only the 26-inch pipeline that was inspected. It seemed like there were some problems with that pipeline, places that had to be replaced. And I want to know what is happening with inspecting the other 2 pipelines. It's well known that there is a bathtub curve for pipeline failures. Older pipelines fail at a very high rate, but new pipelines fail at a much higher rate than the pipelines that were, say, 3 decades ago. A pipeline constructed this decade fails at a higher rate. There is a 42-inch pipeline there, and there's a 32-inch or 34-inch pipeline there. And I would hope that those will be inspected very shortly. We had the same problem with Indian Point when there were baffle bolt problems in one of the reactors. And it was said, oh, well, the other reactor doesn't need to be inspected quickly because it was a different design and it wouldn't be as much of a problem. Well, it was much more of a problem.
30
So
seconds.
when you have something that comes up as a question, you said that the NRC said that they do unannounced inspections when there is some kind of problem that they think might be arising. And I would hope that not only NRC, but that Enbridge would do inspections based on what was found. And I would hope that in our next meetings, you don't just put in the slide, an inspection was done. I hope that you will put in every slide what the result of that inspection was. That was missing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel Cook?
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Cook. I've been a member of the nuclear industry for 40 years. I've worked at nuclear plants from Maine to California and even one in Mexico. I've also been a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers for 47 years. I think it's a shame that the IPEC detractors have caused hundreds of union construction workers to lose good jobs. Nuclear power is needed now more than ever, and now that two perfectly good power generating plants have been closed, you are standing in the way of a timely repurposing of the property. In the last 13 years, Ossing's sewer system has dumped sewage into the Hudson River at least 3 times. These are real impacts to the river, not public relations, vote-grabbing, perceived impacts. I would ask if the IPEC detractors are so concerned about the river, why haven't I heard anything about you trying to shut down the Ossing sewer system? Recently, hundreds of trees were cut down for the construction of apartment buildings. I never heard anybody talk about how bad it is to take down these trees, so environmentalists seem to drop the ball there. I would also challenge you to look at the increased donations to a local environmental group, since the issue of the IPEC releasing small amounts of low-level irradiated water into the river has become such a popular rally cry. I would offer that the local environmental group knew about IPEC releasing water into the river for the past 59 years, and now treat the IPEC detractors as lapdogs they can squeeze for donations by making such a big deal out of nothing. It's a shame that you people don't put your energy into something worthwhile and meaningful, like helping people with food insecurities or affordable housing issues. I sit at these meetings and hear people lament about, oh my God, there's a chemical plant here, there's a trash burning plant here, there's a nuclear plant here, there's a wallboard plant here. It's terrible. I would ask, if these things are so horrific and you're really concerned about your health and the safety of your family, what are you doing here? Why don't you move away? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Are there other speakers pre-registered for this public statement hearing who are here in person?
No, there are not.
Okay, with that, I want to remind folks that there are opportunities to submit comments via writing through our website at dps.ny.gov/Indian Point. Want to thank again NRC for being our guest presenters tonight, and appreciate very much everyone's participation in tonight's meeting. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom. It was. It was a good meeting.